Hi, everyone. This is Jason Bosch. And last weekend, I did a live stream with Alison, both Saturday and Sunday. It was a long, a long, I don't know how many hours we did, 6 hours, and we still didn't get to everything, or she just still didn't get to everything. So she wanted to do another presentation strictly on the last part of what she's been researching, and which is the Mitre Corporation. So sit back. We'll probably do another 3 hours. And I am basically just here to facilitate. And so I'm going to be checking the questions, and I'll be reading the comments. So if you guys have questions for her regarding the presentation, please make them, and I will share them as we go along. So throughout this talk, we'll be taking breaks periodically to answer your questions. And if you could share this with your social media on either Facebook or Twitter or wherever you are at on the interwebs. And I'll just let Alison take it from here. Alison?
Hey, great. I'm just posting to my link. So wait a minute, let me get back on cue. Okay. So thank you for joining me again. This is my sort of third installment. This was a piece that I had prepared initially for the talk I was going to give in Utica, but it ended up the material I prepared was so much more extensive and was really focused on graphene and nanoelectronics, that a big chunk that had to do with cybernetics, the history of cybernetics and sort of human machine systems and the Mitre Corporation had to sort of get buried down. But I thought it was really important because Mitre has tentacles in so many aspects of what is unfolding beyond sort of this initial public health biosecurity threat, that I really wanted to dig into this some more and surface a little bit more information. So I'll be building in some pauses here and there. I welcome questions for that. And, you know, I've been collaborating with a friend who blogs at A Piece of Mindful. Her nom de plume is Steffers, and we've been going back and forth a lot about the nanoelectronics and bioelectronics and graphene. And really, if you've followed my work, you know, it's situated in understanding this as really a disconnect from the natural world and imposition of a militarized construct between life on planet Earth in the way that the original people lived, with a militarized construct that is linked to global capital flows, very much so. So I want to start out with just a brief reading. A good friend from my education days sent me a card with this pamphlet in it just now. So it was sort of amazing synchronicity, because you'll see my very first slide is with John Trudell. But Steffers and I were talking last night about this idea of power and electricity and sort of magnetism of the earth and true grounded electrical systems of our environment versus the engineering systems that are coming, that are in many ways exemplified by the history of the Mitre Corporation. And so I think in this moment, as we're, especially around the world, there are a lot of people gathering together to speak out against the medical passporting system, the lockdown systems, the rising sort of bio-apartheid state that is coming into place, that we be very careful how we situate that. And that, you know, I've had some issues with the word of freedom because, as Stephen Newcomb talks about, the dom is tied to domination and the dome of being a citizen of empire. And that we really should situate this more broadly within the construct of not just our individual freedom as humans, but our right to agency and self-determination, but also our responsibilities to be good stewards of the earth and other beings, and to learn from the other beings of the earth, and to understand that we are all part of a web of electrical connection that predated any sort of cybernetic system, artificial intelligence system, engineered nanoparticle system that they have created, and to actually know who we are, and to navigate all of this in times of, you know, essentially weaponized narrative and psychological warfare, and the ways in which people are manipulated, and it's hard to know what is real and who is telling you the truth and who is not, and what relationships are online and what is substance and what is not. And I'm not here to say I have all the answers, or that you should in any way particularly believe me. Just look at the material and make your own assessment. But we've got to figure things out. And I think clarity is something that John Trudell, who's a leader of the American Indian movement, emphasized very much, that we have to be clear about things. And so I want to start off reading just a little excerpt from, this is a speech that he gave in 1980, and it was called A Survival Gathering. And it was indigenous people of the world, all over the world, met in Pahasapa in the Black Hills, what is now called South Dakota, Lakota lands. And they gathered there for 6 days in the survival gathering. And so he was one of the speakers. So this is 41 years ago, more or less, these thoughts. And so as we go through this, I'm trying to say, we need to think broadly about what reality is, how we construct our reality, how we inhabit reality, how we inhabit stories, how we understand the past. And I think this is a moment of reckoning as we navigate the future with the lens of the past history, and that we have tremendous opportunities in all of the falling apart of the world to rebuild something that is quite different and possibly has healing built into it, and a healing that is much needed. Okay, so this is John Trudell. This is the opening. I'm just going to read a few opening lines. I'd like to thank you all for coming to this place, and I'd like to give thanks for being welcomed here myself. And I would like to talk tonight in honor of all of us in the struggle who have lost our relations to the spirit world. I would like to talk in honor of the wind, one of the natural elements. This is a survival gathering, and one of the things I hope you all learn while you are here is to appreciate the energy and power that the elements are. That of the sun and the rain and the wind. And I hope you go away from here understanding that this is the power, the only real true power. This is the only real true connection we will ever have to power our relationship to Mother Earth. We must not become confused. We must not become confused and deceived by their illusions. And this is really key, their illusions. There is no such thing as military power. There's only military terrorism. There's no such thing as economic power. There is only the economic within these illusions so that we will believe they hold power in their hands, but they do not. All they know how to do is act in a repressive and brutal way. The power. We are a natural part of the earth. We are an extension of the earth, and we are not separate from it. We are a part of it. The earth is our mother. The earth is a spirit, and we are an extension of that spirit. We are spirit. We are power. And they want us to believe that we have to believe them, that we have to assume these consumer identities and these political identities and these religious identities and these racial identities. And they want to separate us from our power. They want to separate us from who we are. He says genocide. And so, so I want that to really be where an idea that you're sitting with as I go through this material today. Because the power is the earth of which we are a part, from the tiniest microbes to the stars, and we are all a part of that natural power, and that much of what we're living through right now is an illusion. It's how we imagine the world to be, and so I'm asserting this in some ways. You know, it feels a little odd to figure out how to share this information that I think is very important, but it also feels somewhat illusory. But then to realize that the illusion itself is something that we need to navigate together. So here, let me share my screen now.
Also, Alison, real
yeah.
quick, you're getting there's a little bit of noise.
I'm sorry, it's the fan. I can't do anything about it.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to see if
you want it to be good, but I can't make it any different. It's just what I got going on.
No.
I can't do anything about it. I'm sorry. Okay. So Mitre Corporation. It is what it is, but it may be an illusion. So take it for what it's worth as we try to figure out how to construct the story. When I fell into Mitre Corporation, it was initially because I'd had some background in cybernetics human machine systems engineering, artificial intelligence, Norbert Wiener. And when we went out to Aberdeen Proving Ground on the solstice, we did a gathering at a natural area nearby. And Mitre Corporation was one of the main interests there. And so when I went to plan to look at upstate New York and see the landscape there, I realized that Rome, which was nearby to where I was going to be speaking, actually had another installation of Mitre Corporation, which is based in Northern Virginia, I believe, or possibly Maryland, but the greater DC area. But that there was another Mitre campus there, and that it was connected with the Air Force Research Lab. So that was sort of the impetus for me to put together this information and put it out into the storyline, because I think in many respects, as I spent some time looking into Mitre Corporation and its history of systems engineering and what that means for us in this moment of, a global biosecurity apparatus, is that in some ways, maybe the story that was told to us about the Cold War and the underpinnings of that were not at all what I learned in school and was told in popular media. And I started to think that maybe actually Mitre, which was there at the beginning of the Cold War era, was a structure by which the environment, Mother Earth, the atmosphere, could be electrically weaponized against life on Earth itself. It was like the inversion of life for this military systems engineering. So that's that. And then I know I've already done Trudell, but this is just a short clip.
It's like there's this predator energy on this planet. And this predator energy feeds upon the essence of the spirit, feeds upon the essence of the human being, the spirit. Now, this predator energy can take fossil fuel and other resources out of the earth, turn it into fuel to run a machine system. But in order for there to be a need for that system, and in order for that system to work, they have to mine our minds to get at the essence of our spirit. And the same way the external mining takes place, it pollutes. We see now, people understand how it poisons the environment, the water, the air, pollution. The mining of the essence, the mining of the spirit, mining our minds, the pollution from that is all of the neurotic, distorted, insecure behavior patterns that we develop. That's the pollution. Because in order for this predatory system, this disease to work, we must not be able to use our minds in a clear, coherent manner. Because if we use our minds in a clear, coherent manner, we will not accept the unacceptable. It's like there's this predator.
So that's it. If we actually use our minds in a clear and coherent manner, we will not accept the unacceptable. And I think that is very central in this moment of sort of psychological operations, that we actually have some clarity about the nature of the problem. And again, I have an analysis that's a little bit different than a lot of folks, but mine is grounded in this idea of artificial intelligence and the cybernetic system as the end game settler colonizer. And so my background is in art history. And so it's sort of looking back in terms of the images of manifest destiny and colonization and the idea of civilization. And John Trudell has some other speeches that he's given about the nature of civilization and how brutal it actually is. And that he calls it the big lie of civilization, that it isn't civilized. Or if we actually thought that civilization was civilized, then the lie would be that civilization is actually good for us and good for life on the planet. And so I created this little visual, I think it's a Currier and Ives print from the late 19th century, ostensibly, I'm sure, extolling the wonders of the train and empire and taming the wilderness and, bringing some order to the natural systems. And you can see on the right, that is nature. These are the ancient beings of the mountains, the water that is filled with the memories of life on the planet as it cycles through the water cycle. But then I sort of pictured bio and nanotechnology, which I've talked about in great detail in my last talks, as being sort of this next phase of empire, right? Like the last phase was you know, with the railroads and the Gatling gun and the decimation of the populations of buffalo that stopped the ability of the original people to live their life in their cultural ways, that the bio-nanotechnology sector is poised to erase what is coming for us in terms of how we understand natural life. And I was maybe it was a bit of a stretch, but all of the black smoke coming out of the locomotive engine just reminded me of the graphene, which was a big part of the conversation yesterday, this idea of the wafting particles coming out of the empire and obscuring this clean natural life. And then this regimentation, once the civilization, once the nanotechnology comes in, is that this is further codified through geoengineering, which is in the sky, through frequencies, which are represented as the wires and the pole lines along the railroad tracks, the sensor networks that will be in the environment and within our bodies, this idea of genetically modifying the food that we consume, the water we drink, the social engineering that has to take place to move into this transhumanist agenda, which they call Human Plus, which is sort of down in this little area waiting for the train, or the Human Plus, and the idea of smart cities, and in which essentially to keep us living in this place, empire has to come after our creativity, our imagination, to separate us from who we are, as John Trudell said, and that overarchingly there is this imperative for domination. And so as we think through today, and all of the people who are gathered ostensibly for the idea of freedom is, you know, I cautioned today on Twitter, I said, you know, there are word spells in place, and freedom with the DOM in place essentially says that we will agree to live in as citizens of empire, right? And that there may be conditional rights offered as citizens of empire, but the one right that isn't extended is to live outside of the empire, which is what the original people wanted, and which is why they were so dangerous, and there was the attempt to erase them off of the continent because they didn't actually want to be part of the empire. And so I would just caution, as we gather like today and in future gatherings, when we speak about freedom, that the DOM part is, I think, the catch. That's the back door of conditions. And I think at this point in time, if what we're looking at is an empire of biotechnology, nanotechnology, nanoelectronics, which is an unseen weapon that we should consider if that's the word we want to use, or we want to come up with other concepts and other ways to tell the story that we're trying to tell. So this is an encapsulation, an infographic I had just to sort of reframe for those of you who may have missed the first two talks. And I sort of have this like as, you know, maybe a wallet card handout of the short version of what this is. And I realize I need to probably have a glossary for all of these terms. But it starts in the small circle and extends out. I say that you would sort of read it from the upper left to the bottom right. And a number of people noted that it seems like an egg hatching, and that maybe we should be scrambling this egg, which I'm all for. But I think first we have to know what it is. What is the story that they're trying to tell? And as we construct our own narrative, we have to be aware of how we navigate their story. And their story, the linchpin on all of this is the digital identity, which will lead to a digital twinning. And that's at this point, medical passport systems that are tied to blockchain and tied to this idea of an electronic wallet or a digital wallet, but is ultimately not exclusive to the health protocol, is actually going to be offered through other venues, including voting, education, public assistance, universal basic income, maybe reparations, these other ways of getting people onto a digital identity, the ID 2020 program. And that will be linked up to, in the twinning enterprise, your blockchain identity connected to sensor technologies will sort of build out in more and more finer and finer detail your digital twin. And as they build your digital twin in more and more robust detail, there's actually the goal that they can manipulate your twin in a virtual cyber space in a way that will affect your material life. And that's how they imagine it, whether or not they can actually accomplish that, but that's how they talk about it. And the policy justification for all of these things, clearly now we're operating in this, global health imperative, and that's the primary one, but managing people in status of poverty, which is exacerbated by the lockdown, as well as climate, which we all know that the pandemic crisis is interlocked with the climate crisis. And all of it is about channeling global capital through global impact markets, those are linked to government policies that are outsourced through public-private partnerships. And under the guise of transparency and accountability, they legitimize vast amounts of data aggregation, which coincidentally are then being fed into the AI, the artificial intelligence, to attempt to trigger the singularity. And so ultimately, poverty, climate, and health are being fed through smart sensor technologies in smart city environments. And all the meanwhile, they're building out the sentient world simulation. There's an element of signals intelligence and gamification, risk management, threat management, and Mitre Corporation is a huge piece of that. And so as they build you out, there's this idea of digital twinning that is an avatar, that the metaverse, which is the digital representation of the world, starts to take precedence over your actual material world, as through geofencing and other sort of lockdown measures, people have more and more limitations imposed on their physical reality and their face-to-face relationships that they're able to access. And in doing that, in living online, more and more of our spirit and our soul becomes harvested. And I think that is sort of this predator energy that Trudell speaks of, is harvesting our spirit into this false consciousness, into the artificial intelligence world, in an effort to create generalized artificial intelligence, AI that acts where machines have their own identity outside of human intervention. And that is the goal. And then ultimately, this idea of transforming evolution from a Darwinian prospect, to an intelligent design where they can, the powers that be, the predator energy, will attempt to break the code of life such as they believe it is, and push God out of the way, and then in doing so become the rulers of the universe. And again, I'm not saying that that is definitely, that this is all accomplished, that this is something that is a done deal, but I think this framework for understanding the motivations and what is happening is very helpful to understand how the medical passporting systems weave through the smart technology systems, the gaming systems that are tied to global hedge funds that are betting on your futures, and that increasingly reality is going to be mirrored into digital space. And in that mirroring, the data that's generated in your real life, in your digitally twinned life, will be leveraged to, a pretty profane intended outcome. So this is a report I found 2 or 3 weeks ago as I was preparing for my talk in Utica. Sometimes it's a little shocking to look at the dates on these documents. We know that the cybernetics goes back to the World War II era, and that was Norbert Wiener, who was essentially, a wunderkind genius who acted as a human computer and was sort of the father of artificial intelligence. And so the cybernetic systems continued, as I mentioned last week, with Joseph Licklider and his idea of like the Intergalactic Federation and the ARPANET through the 60s. But even in terms of nanotechnology, nanotechnology wasn't anything that was at all on my radar before the past year. I mean, I could sort of imagine what it might be, but it wasn't anything I thought had a particular bearing on my life. It turns out that Mitre Corporation, they have been working in the nanotechnology space since at least 1992. Okay, so we're talking almost 30 years that this R&D has been in place, and for the most part, the general public not being aware that this is even coming. This idea of working on millimeter scale robots, the nano robots that they imagine inhabiting our bodies. And that even at this point in time, that Mitre Corporation was working with Harvard University, and their key point person on that was Charles Lieber, which I'll get into a little bit more detail. But I think as we understand sort of the narrative around what happened in China, Lieber was on the radar for a bit in terms of his participation in the 10,000 Talents program. And his work was on nanowires and nano antenna and these like nano level computing systems. And that he, potentially had an inappropriate financial arrangement with the government of China. But it's very imperative to understand that this settler colonial AI is coming after the entire world, and it's being incubated within the borders of the United States, among other places. But Charles Lieber and Mitre were working in the nanotechnology space for well on 30 years before the more recent incident in Wuhan. So we can't really just place the blame over on something that happened out there in China, because these things are a direct extension of the corporate militarization of the research that came out of World War II engineering design that date back to Wiener, and that we have to own that history. So in 1992, they've been working on it this long. In 1997, James Ellenbogen, who was a close associate with Charles Lieber, wrote a paper called Matter as Software. And if, you know, I've mentioned several times Neil Stephenson's book, The Diamond Age, where a key element in this book is the idea of a matter compiler. And even in Star Wars, or, you know, a lot of the futuristic, you know, sci-fi scenarios is this idea that you can wave your hands and create something, you know, out of thin air, this matter that you can just program it at will. But that this was something in 1997 that they were looking into in a serious way. So it has a long time frame. I've encouraged a lot of people, again, if you're going to gatherings, public gatherings, to try to have conversations about what is happening. The Internet of Bio-Nano Things is central to this. I use the hashtag IOBNT, you know, # IOBNT. Encourage people to look into this, particularly this gentleman, his name is Ian Akyildiz, and he's at Georgia Tech. And I've used this slide a number of times, but I think it's important to understand what is real, what is illusion, what is programmable. In the quantum, you know, world of quantum physics and nanocomputing, they talk about all this space at the bottom, that most of the world is empty space with these tiny little molecules moving around. And so the military defense contractors are looking to leverage this and to sort of reframe our understanding of life and consciousness as something that is seamless with ubiquitous computing and sensor technology. And so just as you see these little dots all over about phones and screens and things no longer being actually in a screen as we know it, but that our consciousness and our thoughts, which are the little green dots, are sensor networks that are flowing through our bodies and interfacing with the real world. So that the programmable matter, as they imagine it, includes us, includes all living things. And last week, I think I showed the clip from MIT of the cyborg plants, cyborg botany, and that's something that they're developing. So I would say, for the most part, this is all dual use technology, and people, you know, it's all framed as something that we want to help people address neurological problems, or problems with paralysis, or problems with Alzheimer's, or other things. But, you know, Giordano always talks about them as dual use. And I think that we need to understand that in many ways there is a war being waged on consciousness, on our very spirit, and in essence, as the original people have known, you know, since the landing of the invaders here. Like there is a war going on, and it may not be a war that is openly declared, and we may not actually even understand what the tools of warfare are. In this space, you know, Mitre is in sort of the greater DC area, not too far from Wilmington, which is the home of DuPont. I'm in Philly, so I'm near DuPont. And this idea of DuPont playing also a leading role in nanotechnology, and working, and I've spoken about this before, in the space of the microbiome, this idea of using your gut to control the operations of your brain, the connection between the gut-brain axis and the vagus nerve, manipulating that, as I'll show later, through nanotechnology instruments. And so if we know that DuPont's origins as a chemical company were in gunpowder, in bullets and dynamite, what are these new weapons against natural life, and how does nanotechnology fit into what is coming? So, again, this touches on what I talked about consciousness, and I've mentioned this book a couple times, but Rainbow's End with Werner Vinge. It actually opens with this idea of a virus, YGBM virus, you gotta believe me. And I'll just read this quote in this context of understanding what is real and what is projection and what is a frequency weapon. This is from the opening chapter. One other key individual is Alfred Vaz. This is actually from a review, an Indian intelligence head. And he and two of his colleagues from Europe and Japan have uncovered a plot to deliver a YGBM virus in a clever fashion. YGBM means you gotta believe me, and that is mind control. And they recruit a helper they meet only in virtual space called Rabbit, who will assist in infiltrating biolabs near the University of California, San Diego, where they suspect the virus is under development. And again, even within this space, there is the reinforcement that the virus is the bioweapon. when actually it's very likely a frequency weapon. And I will just hit on this again, just a quick reminder.
Maybe you just don't see anything in this picture that you recognize as technology. And just because technology isn't obvious doesn't mean it's absent.
Okay, and so I would just say in that space, if we substitute technology, we can imagine neuro weapons or neurofrequency weapons. Just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And I think we've been conditioned that if something like that existed, we would know about it and we would be able to see it and put our hands around it. And at least in terms of now getting the microscopy on graphene from La Quinta Columna, like we have a better sense at what some of these nanotechnologies are and how they are being used.
Maybe you just don't see anything in this picture.
Click. Okay, so this is a paper from 2021 June. So this is a very recent paper, and they're talking about nanomedicine specifically tied to this health situation, right? And what they talk about is using these nanoparticles for specific therapeutic purposes, including the magnetic properties of the particles, including biosensors, and including optimizing injectables for the purpose of addressing this new biosecurity state. It says specifically that this crisis has set the stage to evolve the concepts of nanotechnology into reality. As its potential is revealed, it can offer innovative ways of protecting healthy and infected individuals and helping end the pandemic. Okay, and so I just want to reinforce here that it's talking about innovation and protection of healthy people. So this is normalizing the use of biosensor technology through nanoparticulates as a modus operandi. That would be something that all people will just be carrying around, nanoparticulates in their streams, biosensors to alert to some abnormality. And I will say, within the context of the Mitre technologies and the threat assessment, is that the situation has been framed is that even healthy individuals that don't meet a health parameter, as has been established by a largely militarized science research community, is a threat and can be dealt with appropriately, according to whatever brutal means what they seek to apply to deal with that perceived threat. But this is all based in biosensors. And I will say the other piece of this is, as we're looking at the neurological side effects for people, including seizures, that we're seeing more and more often, is the use of nanomedicine in neurological issues. Is, do we have a test bed now of individuals who will then be will enable further use of nanomedicine to address the problems that have been created through thousands upon thousands of people? And will that enable the hastening of human trials in certain nanomedicines, because they will say, listen, there's a very significant need and we need to proceed with this. We will just set aside the normal protocols and move forward. And I think that that is a very real concern as well. So Mitre technology, I'm just going to come off on I think after this one, I'll have a point of stopping, but it talks about solving problems for a safer world. We have to understand that the origins, and I'll go into this a bit later, were in essentially threat assessment in the post-Sputnik era of using radar systems to monitor for air traffic under threat of missile deployment, nuclear missile deployments. And then from that space, they actually moved into a lot of other areas, including air traffic control. So again, systems engineering, if you imagine society as not unlike an air traffic control grid. So using those systems, artificial intelligence, community systems engineering, cybersecurity, which at this point now is going to include the biosensor space, computer security, economic and cost analysis. So that is going to be important going forward when we look at how the systems engineering interfaces and threat assessment interfaces with social impact investing, emergency preparedness. Sorry, I I think there's something going on. So, okay. Intelligence, modeling and simulation, which is gamification, national security, public health, and risk management. So you can see these are all areas that MITRE is currently involved with, but it came ultimately out of this post-Sputnik era with a focus on radar and frequency. So Jason, I don't know if you're there, if anybody has any questions at this point, or if you have any observations.
I just went and got coffee, so I missed the beginning of it.
That's okay. I know you needed. Well, listen, I just want to use this opportunity. If anyone is listening in at this point, it doesn't look like there's anything in the chat. So
I do have one there. Well, there are. I have some things in the chat, but
oh, okay. Well, I just want to say, because so Jason is here today. Like, he has put in hours upon hours of like upgrading his computer software interface, because we've kind of worn it into the ground over the past year. So I would encourage Jason, do you mind sharing your email for PayPal if anyone who's following along might like to support and help offset some of the costs? Because as you know, we don't do any of this behind a paywall. This is all upfront, but people have to live and people have to have the equipment to do the work. So I don't know. I personally, I'm gonna be doing this as soon as I ring off this call, but if maybe you could put it in the chat or let people know, because
yeah,
I advocate on your behalf. You're doing all of this amazing work with very minimal on such a shoestring budget, or no budget, really. The kindness of strangers and friends.
Well, I'm on credit.
Yeah.
I was able to get a computer because B&H Photo had given. I had a credit, so I have 12 months to pay for my computer. So I have a little bit of time, which is all But
we still have to. It's still useful to do the asking, because we should, like, the credit industry is part of the whole control grid anyway.
Yeah, no, it's all bad. I mean, even the computer is, bad in many ways. Yeah, I mean, I don't really like asking for money, but if you want to donate,
I'm going to just assert it for you on your behalf. Do you mind?
Sure.
Just let people know.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I'm very grateful, and I want to make sure that I can pitch in, but I think other people would be as well. Because
yeah, well, I know some people helped me get my van fixed recently, which was really helpful. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's Argus Fest, PayPal argusfest@gmail.com, which is the YouTube channel, argusfest@gmail.com. But yeah,
okay. Well,
thank you guys.
For humoring me.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And so I do have one question. Oh yeah, this is kind of a more broad question. It's, have we ever known who or what we really are? No, that's kind of a large. That's a big question.
We are shapes, according to John Trudell, we are shapes of the earth.
We are stardust. We are.
Well, but I mean, it's useful. Actually, I was having a really good conversation with Cliff about this yesterday, and it's on the one hand, it's really unsettling once you start to work at things at a nanostructure and you imagine that they're creating things that are beyond our current ability to sense and manipulating things, and it feels very overwhelming. But like I say, life is on the side of life, and as much as they might attempt to assert their dominance in that space, I think nature still stands with us. So if we can get clarity around what's really happening and imagine that there are lots of possibilities that we may not even be attuned to or aware of, it's actually a lot less scary. So I think the possibilities of what we are much broader than just our material selves. And that's why I keep asserting is that, definitely build community, definitely assert, use your voice in the right way, definitely, educate, but also that it's the spirit part is, I think, where the energy is, and shapes of the earth. That's
I'm not sure if you want to answer this one or not. I'm not even sure who this person is, but do you think Peter Josephs are opportunists or useful idiots? I think I missed the beginning of it, so I don't know who Peter Josephs are.
Yeah, I don't know, and I generally don't tend to want to engage in drama stuff. What I say is, don't feel under any obligation to trust anybody. Build your own trust relationships off a blockchain, listen, see what makes sense to you, and try to have clarity. And each person is going to have to find their own way through. And what makes sense to some people, won't make sense to other people. my lens may not fit other people's lenses. So, you know what, I'm putting stuff out there and trying to build community around people who resonate with the things I talk about.
This wasn't really a question, but it's been brought up several times, and it was just brought up on Facebook, about how overwhelmed people get with the information that you put. You know, it's a lot, and you kind of, you go over it really fast, and it's like a fire hose sort of situation. Do you have tips for people on how they can, that might help them digest some of this stuff?
I need to get better at like structuring this almost like, I think like a course or a syllabus or something. I mean, I think that's actually, that was part of some of the conversations I've had with a few people over the last day. Is I really feel strongly that, you know, this far into where we are now, is that my lens is that this is a collective effort, and that there are people in the community that whose skills and gifts I really value, and that balance out some of the intensity of the things that I have to offer. And so I would love to maybe even, I know we've talked about this, Jason, of revisiting the structure of the website to create space for more collaboration and featuring people who have other sides to bring into this. And, you know, I know, you know, I've talked to Cliff about like offering some solutions, friends who are looking at sort of some ways of constructively maintaining agency in this. And, you know, I have my little ceremonies and the things I do, but that's certainly not all. And there are other people who have other things to offer that I think might balance out the intensity of the information. And clearly a glossary and maybe a how-to guide, because that's something it seems to be both things. People need to know, like, how do I start this if I've just found you like the last couple of weeks? And it's hard for me. I need to really sit and reflect, because I'm in a different place than I was a year ago with my knowledge level, to unpeel it back. It's not like I can just like say, oh, read these 5 articles, because some of those things I wrote 6 months ago, I have a very different view on now, because I have different information. My understanding has deepened. Not that I don't support it. It's just it's different. So I almost have to like whole cloth start something new and then maybe index with the glossary. But I need to get serious about that. And I understand. And I would say if it's overwhelming, like, don't feel like you need to do it. You know, I'm ultimately, what we're dealing with here is an energetic thing. And if listening to me makes you feel bad, you won't hurt my feelings if you don't listen to me. It's okay. Like, I'm not here to ask that you know all of these things, or that you deal with all of these things. Pick and choose. Do it in bits, or don't do it at all. And some people feel better knowing, and some people feel better not knowing. And, you know, I'm not here to judge. I mean, in that way, regular people, not media people, but just regular people who are navigating their way. I'm not here to judge you on your course.
Another thing that Alison and I have talked about, which is going through these presentations with some newbies, some people that don't know anything. A lot of people that are watching this, most people that are watching this have already kind of followed us up until this point to some extent. So you're not like totally green. But what I wanted to do was have this presentation to someone that all of this is completely new to them, and then just basically get feedback from them, like what, you know, if we can stop, just kind of like how we're doing here, we stop and have questions where we can clarify, and then that would help me as a media producer, if I'm editing something, to know like what, you know, what I need to work on, or what I need to highlight, if I need to stop and pause for a second or whatever. So that was an idea that we tossed around as well.
Group.
Exactly. It's kind of a focus group. Exactly. They do. That's what they do. They do the focus group. They figure out what's working.
Social scientists doing
What's working and what's not working. But I mean, people learn differently. I mean, I learn, you know, differently than other people learn differently, and so it is useful to know kind of what works and what doesn't. And if there's something that makes sense to you, you know, we've talked about this before, but take this information, because it's about the information. You know, if you can figure out a way to present it in a different way, then that would be great, you know.
And, you know, I really do like the idea of having more collaboration, and I'm not sure how to both like administer that or moderate it or whatever, but having some file things where, like, I have a lot of infographics that get buried, but other people may have other ways of representing concepts, right? And we do live in sort of a meme-ish kind of world. And so there might be ways of setting up directories or things that are not just simply me, but are people, like a collective, a curated set of resources so that people can go and access it. Have the raw material, but then I think in the end, I probably should try to set up like a syllabus with some hot links or something, and like give people enough structure that they don't just have to dive into it.
We need a cartoon with a little avatar, like, hi, I'm hi, Nano.
All right, are we caught up?
No, I've got a couple more questions.
Okay.
Can Alison briefly touch on the regulatory or legislative history that brought us to this point where we are facing covert IOB&T? So for those of you who don't know, Internet of Bodies and Nanotech, is that right?
Bio-nano things. Yeah.
Bio-nano things. Agenda. How has this been shielded by plausible deniability?
Well, it's all for our own good, right? I mean, I think part of it, it's like what I try to do is the myth. I mean, if we actually want to know about the policy, I mean, it goes at least back to the papal bulls, if not the Roman Empire. I think Joseph has made that very clear, is that what we're dealing with is an imperial project, and empire is such a theme of all of these like war games and simulations. So, I mean, I think particularly the more I understand the systems engineering and the managerial class, and that's why I wanted to touch on Mitre, is that it is technically a nonprofit, and it's just like a skunk works, right? And so it's something that is separate. There are significant elements of our lives that are being run by consulting firms to government that just are there no matter who's in office, who gets elected, what hearings, what laws are passed. They don't go away. They are just churning along, 30 years, and they do their work. And nobody, like, how many people out there know about Mitre, know that it's a nonprofit, know that it came out of the war machine at MIT, know that they're advancing, a makeover of Medicaid under the context of a cybersecurity bioterrorist threat. Like, very few people know that. And I think part of it is within our culture, like we've outsourced a lot of government, so it's no longer accountable. We've embedded it within a nonprofit complex that can then be hijacked by predator philanthropy and corporate contracting. It's all baked into globalization, which, again, I'm not a nationalist, but at this point, this coup of life on Earth is global in nature. Like, even the major corporate and defense interests, they have no particular allegiance to any geography anymore. People of a certain geography, and that all of this is happening as we're credentialing people. Like, quality of life is shrinking. We're getting to a post-industrial society, possibly post-human society, and that the few good jobs, solid jobs left are the managerial class to manage this machine, which is terror. Like, it's a machine of terror, and yet we have to sort of package it in a bow to make us think it's not as terrible as it really is. And that's why I keep going back to what has happened, to the indigenous people, like We Are the Power, is if we understood from the beginning that this was a terroristic enterprise, we might not be so shocked by it. But that's a lot of unlearning. Like, when people say, who are we really, right? And they have an idea of what it means to be, a citizen of the United States, and they don't imagine that means that you're an imperial citizen, and it goes back to the Roman Empire. They don't think of it that way.
Yeah. We traditionally think of, government, business, and nonprofits as being these separate things, but more and more I'm thinking that they're just all parts of a larger whole. And and that's what kind of divides people too. People on the left are concerned about the corporations, people on the right are concerned about the government, and then government, the nonprofits have kind of like filled in the gap where they kind of they've escaped criticism, but they're all working together. I don't know.
And it's a structure. Like, so there are very few individual people. Like, no one person is going to stop this thing. And then once you're in it, most people, they choose their life course, and they don't really, there are not that many people who are willing to take really strong principled stands to refuse it, because they feel like, well, one person isn't going to make the difference. But what I'm saying is, if this is a spiritual thing and that the stakes, this is the game for all the marbles, we need to reconcile with that. And that's the story I tell myself. That's the narrative as I'm framing, is this is this reckoning point.
Well, it doesn't feel practical, because, taking a strong principled position just doesn't seem pragmatic. You're like, well, maybe I'll compromise on this or that or whatever in order to, have more allies, or what you think of our allies. But and maybe there's a time and a place to do that, but there are also, I think, some things that are non-negotiable. And I've seen this with the political process, where under Hillary Clinton, I was like, nope, that's it. Actually, under Obama, I was like, I'm never voting lesser of two evils again.
Yeah.
And then as it kept getting more and more, quote unquote evil, it was just like it's like a game of limbo,
Well,
but yeah,
this is something else that came out of my conversation with Cliff, because we were talking about this certain kind of special water with like a different sideways hydrogen bond or whatever. And this, it matches when you talk about nanotech and nanomedicine. What's so ostensibly so marvelous about it is that at this tiny level, one little like molecule can make a huge disproportionate impact and, so to speak, change. It can change things in ways often that are unexpected and don't apply to the rules as you normally understand them. So I'm trying to figure out, like, we talked about this special water and how you can have like a liter of that and pour it into 5 gallons, and then it in and of itself would restructure the rest of the water. And so if we can imagine those of us who are trying to navigate this from a point of clarity, of cleaning the pollution, as John Trudell says, right? Like we're trying to navigate this toxic environment. If we can hold just having some clarity, not saying we're ever perfect at it, but as best we can, then perhaps we can have a disproportionate impact in an unexpected way. And that's the metaphor that I'm trying to use. I'm trying to take away from something good out of nanotechnology.
Okay, so what kind of minds does the evil plan must come from? What kind of, how do these people think? Has your investigation gone into the direction of identifying the people behind this plan? So, I mean, I think you've done that. You pointed out a lot of people, but it seems like you're looking more at the administrators of it as opposed to like the orchestrators of it. I don't know if that's something that it's kind of hard. It seems somebody asked me that, like, who are they? I'm like,
well, I have often said in the past that I thought, like, up until recently, that they was, the impact management project, because all of the data analytics and the sensor networks were running for global capital through the impact management project and the sustainable development goals. But then, as I've gotten further and further into the whole graphene conversation, and my friend Steffers were like, well, maybe the Mr. Global is Mr. Graphene, like maybe. And to me, that's why in some ways understanding it as a predator energy for John Trudell is that I'm not trying to let people off the hook. And I will say, and this is where I'm a bit different than where I was last year, I was very intent on mapping all the people and mapping all the connections. And I'm not saying that's not important and it's compelling. It's become more and more of a hassle for me to try to do that in that software. But I think these outsized players, the Klaus Schwabs, the Bill Gates, the Elon Musks, the Jeff Bezoses, they play a role in this. Like, if we understand this is like, a very big strategic narrative framework, and there's plots and subplots, is that they'd like us to pay attention, focus our attention in certain areas, and so that other things can proceed unimpeded. And so, for example, I think in this overall scheme, Charles Lieber is a really important individual because of his role with nanotechnology. But there are hundreds, if not thousands, of other technologists who are working in this space, Ian Akildas, who are tiny, like they wouldn't even merit a subplot in this, but they're very important, right? And so I think in the end, we're all sort of complicit in it because we're all like part of a system that isn't confronting what is happening. And so if we try to point our fingers at the big key players that they want us to look at, that means that we're not looking at other things that we should be looking at. I think. And actually, once you start looking, you realize there are so many thousands, it's hard to even know how you would ever even start mapping them.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody that I tend to feel that everybody we are, even the people that there are people that are actually, building the thing, but they're not the people that are like making the designing of it, like connecting the nanotech to smart cities and smart Internet of Things. I think there is a
I think if you're
but it's really
if you're
hard to
working at a defense contracting university on the Internet of Nano Things, you have some clue about what you're doing. I don't think it's totally, they may not know the finance side, but
yeah,
like,
I'm not so sure. I mean, I think people can be pretty myopic, but
we
I
won't
don't
need
know.
eyes eventually. It'll just beam it all into our brain. We won't need eyes anymore.
Well, with the monetary, I mean, I can use the monetary system as an example because I've been studying the monetary system, and people like try to get into like, okay, who owns the monetary system? Who's actually running and managing the system? And I'm like, well, it's really hard to get at. I do think that does exist, and I do think it's kept under wraps pretty much. But I don't even have to go there. I can show you that it's a bad system. I can show you how the system is designed and how it's actually doing harm. And I think that's enough. We don't have to like say it's these, because like people are replaceable. If we don't eliminate the idea, if we don't eliminate that this is even a cool thing to do,
Yeah. But like we've got BlackRock, we've got Blackstone, we've got graphite. Like we've got, there's these different elements. And so, and a lot of this stuff in the financial markets is being run on AI. And I think increasingly, and I'll show this in some of the clips, is that these simulations are being run on AI. So when I literally say we need a global peace movement against settler colonizing artificial intelligence, that's, I think, where it's going. And then in that space, if the world is getting so profoundly out of balance, then it is up to each of us to try to figure out how to reassert a balance in actual Mother Nature as best we can from a place of creativity and love. So,
where does Alison recommend me telling my friends where to start looking into all of this? I talk about transhumanism and some of my friends, and they think I'm crazy.
Well, I mean, I was recommended that you can't get someone to understand what they're not ready to look at. I mean, unfortunately, that's true. And so I don't say, believe me, I say, here are the reports. Here's a link to the report. I'll talk later about finding out that someone was doing synthetic programmable hallucinations, like computer program hallucinations that go directly to your brain. Nothing I ever wanted to know about, right? But clearly a guy from MIT last year just finished his dissertation on it, or 2019. So these are these original things to say, now, am I saying that they'll be able to definitely use this technology in the way they're talking about? I can't prove that. I'm not, as far as I know, part of their experiments, and I don't anticipate having access to their findings, but that's where their headspace is. And that's what I try to talk to people about. And it does sound crazy, because I have to admit, like, I don't know, yesterday somebody took a screenshot of me and like put a clown face on me and said, oh, like making fun that it was about graphene and a planetary computer and the space program. Well, I can't help it if it's about graphene and developing a planetary computer system, and that this is all built on a history of cybernetics and considering space exploration. It might sound crazy. I mean, and I guess that's what the point that person was trying to make, was to make me sound like I didn't know what I was talking about, but it's very well documented what I was talking about. People might have a different interpretation of the materials about Microsoft's plan for the planetary computer and the barcode of life, and Joe Licklider's and his, intergalactic network memo from 1963. They might analyze it differently, but I'm saying, I think that there is a through line that we need to consider as we navigate what's coming, and it has a history. And so that's what I weave together. But I think it's based on trust, and it's based on people being prepared to unlearn and let go and face things that are scary. And so, yeah, don't force it on people, because it's not going to work. If you force it on people, they'll just be mad at you.
This next question is really just a kind of a false misrepresentation of what's going on here. But is it wrong or immoral for us to bully them individually? I know this is personal opinion, but I'd like to say that the kid taking the contractor job from MIT, that they're not responsible for their actions I'm being a bad person for that. I don't quite exactly understand how that works out, but I think what they're saying is like, implying the idea that we're bullying people, maybe. I'm not sure, but I think it is important to, like, in terms of like pointing out people's names. First of all, we're not talking about, it doesn't seem like you're talking about the, a kid just out of college,
Oh, no,
university,
this
but
person wasn't a mature adult. No, I mean, he chose to write his dissertation on that. He was someone who was into Hollywood special effects, and yeah, no, this was his choice. That was not his job. He chose to develop that technology. So yeah, I mean, we have moral choices that we have to make, and I understand there are economic choices that individuals make, but imagine where we would be if the people in the health delivery space were willing to talk about the Internet of Bio-Nano things, right? Imagine what would happen if the teachers were willing to talk about artificial intelligence feedback loops to program children for jobs where they're going to have to work as an avatar. Imagine if everybody in the world actually had the guts to say what was actually happening and to face it and to say, I don't want to live this way. I don't want, this isn't the world that we want. This isn't the world. This isn't a world that's kind to our other beings. This is not a way of being that uses resources wisely. Like, there's a lot of things that if we actually all got together and were willing to look at the truth of it and refuse, it could be different. But people have to get there. And unfortunately, all of the institutions that people have been conditioned to lean on, government institutions, faith institutions, labor institutions, community-based institutions, like, they're all compromised. Like, these people, the concentration of wealth is so disproportionate. They've spread it around so much that everyone is compromised at this point. And so you have to be willing to walk away from the institutions as they are and rebuild them in a new way, which isn't easy. I'm not implying that that's an easy prospect, but it's
so embedded. It's so much part of the fabric of our whole existence as it currently is, that it's hard to, like, it's hard for people to wrap their mind around, like, just turning their backs on it. Like, I tell people, like every single institution we have is thoroughly corrupt, not like a little bit corrupt, but like deeply rot corrupt. And it's hard for people to wrap their mind around that and say, no, we need to, I think people get overwhelmed, and it
The people, like, I mean, people could make different choices. I'm not saying everybody in every institution is, but at some point, when we're talking about creating a ubiquitous computing, militarized synthetic biology world, we're going to actually have to say something. Like, the chance for the time for not saying anything it's going to be over. So I should probably keep going a little bit. Do you mind?
Well, I have a few more. Do you want to do?
Okay.
Yeah. Let me just.
Maybe we should just have a weekly talk show.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, but so I don't quite understand this question, but maybe you'll get it. The paper from LQC, do you know what that is? Has been reviewed, and it seems that the G conclusion, I'm guessing general conclusion, of the, please don't do that, just write the question, is on the vax is misleading. This needs to be reconsidered. Do you know of this finding? So I'm not sure if that's something you know.
No, I mean, my understanding is there is a second finding of that as well. And I think even if someone said, guess what, it's not in these, it is very clear. All you have to put in is graphene oxide and the V word and as adjuvant, and it all comes up, everything. We cannot, at this point of the game, not look at what is going on with this two-dimensional material, and has been for 20 years. And we can't not look at nanoelectronics, which I think will be much clearer when I get into this a little bit in a little more detail. So, if people want to discount, again, you're relying on this idea of you have to have electron microscopy to have any authority in the position, which I would say from a class analysis and a domination analysis is wrong. It's just leaning into the scientism. So even if that analysis hadn't been done, the very fact that once it was exposed, people were deeply starting to look into what is actually in this material, how is it being used in pervasive ways, how much research has been used into cytotoxicity, its use in all sorts of nanomedicines in its implication for reproductive health and placentas, and food and built environment. And I mean, the implications of it are staggering within the context of human plus life, which is what we're talking about. So I don't really even at this point talk about the C word anymore, because to me, it was never just about that. It's about the shift to transhumanism, which is clearly nanotechnology is a key element of that. And clearly graphene is a key element of nanoelectronics.
I'd like to say something really quick too in regards to the clarity and the taking a position, because I've always been a very strong anti-war. I've always been like very firm. I'm like, I will not vote for someone who supports war because it's mass murder. And I think about the story of during the times of slavery, there were basically two groups of people trying to address slavery. There were the abolitionists, and then there were the progressives, I guess you would call them. And the progressives were saying, listen, this is too much of a part of our system. It's not practical that we can stop it, but let's at least like make the life a little bit like easier for the slaves. Like maybe we can raise some money to buy them and send them back to Africa, or we can make laws where the masters can't beat them or whatever. And the other group said, no, slavery cannot exist in any shape or form, and we must fight it with every ounce of our being. And I think that's kind of what we're dealing with here is there's kind of like a watering down and trying to like focus, okay, it's just on the COVID, or it's just this, or maybe we can use blockchain identity cryptocurrency to help us, when it's taking a hard line is, you might disagree with it, but I think is a reasonable position. It's a fair position in the same way that being opposed to slavery is a reasonable and just position, even though it may not seem like you might feel like you can maybe make more ground by taking another route or something. I don't know. This is something that I was just thinking about. Are you familiar with Curtis Kallenbach?
I'm not.
Okay, let's continue on then, and then we'll come back to any questions. I'll keep collecting the questions.
Okay. All right. So you're back. Okay. Okay. So I pulled a lot of these clips this past week. Some of you guys might have seen them on social media already, but I'm putting a few up. James Giordano, he's essentially, I don't know, as my analysis, he's a professor at Georgetown of bioethics. And so I guess if the game is that they have to tell you what they're doing, he's the guy who said, well, I told you what we were doing and nobody said no. So he comes in, essentially talks about really scary things about biotech and neural weapons and the brain as battle space. So I just have a short clip here I want to play for you. This is a conference a webinar that he did last August.
Big data by itself is able to take the relative capabilities and power that you get of understanding the brain sciences and augment that in ways that in some cases are arithmetic augmentations and in other cases are far more geometric. In reality, what big data allows is to take the neurosciences as a convergent set of sciences, the natural sciences, biotechnology, the social sciences, as focused upon correlating neural structures and functions in individuals and in groups. And instead of just summating them, what's referred to as, if you will, sort of a sigma function, allows us to create an integral function across the range, the levels and dynamics of all the different types of information and types of data that we're learning about individual brains from the bottom up, if you will, from the individual neuron as best we possibly can, all the way to the amassed system that is that organism, that individual, that person. And then beyond that, how does that person interact within their ecology? Literally the rational accounting and dynamics of their housekeeping, their relationships, their resource use, their movements. And by doing that, we can do two things. We can describe in a way that is definitive things that happened before, and utilizing that in a correlative way, we can predict things that are going to happen in the future. And you do understand, of course, that if you manipulate those data on a variety of levels, from the infinitesimally small to the magnanimously large, just by changing the data, you can change the way individuals are regarded and treated.
And hopefully that brings you right to your edge of your seat in anticipation for those of you who are fans of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later, because what we're really doing is we're contending and dealing with others that way through their data and or utilizing their data as a repository for information about them to be able to be far more specific in the way we deal with them, the way we assess them, the way we affect them, which is a really fancy way of saying the way we target them.
All right, so that's a pretty intense couple of minutes there. You know, I want to reframe this in the context of last week's talk, where I was touching on Nippon Telegraph and Telephone's report from March 2021, where they're talking about digital twinning and building the digital metaverses and trying to figure out not only that the material person would shape how the digital twin would evolve in digital space, but anticipating a future where the digital twin would engage in some behavior distinct from the material person. And then over time, the data would be synced up. And then that change in the digital twin would reflect back on the actual material person. And so what Giordano is talking about is this aggregation of masses of amounts of data. And in particular, they're very focused on data around brain activity. So that's the Brain Project. A lot of that is embedded within Alzheimer's research and other things. My sense is that really it's about getting the biosensors across the blood-brain barrier and getting the data, again, to sort of try to crack the code of life. But in the meantime, you hear in this clip where they're saying, we can shape the data to change how people are treated and identified. And you know, I've said in the past that I've had a number of exchanges with people who have been victims of cyber torture, remote manipulation. You know, when he straight up at the end says that we can figure out how to target them, that is a way of using data, using your digital twin to be weaponized against you. And that would be not only data about your biological function and your brain function, but also your function in society. And the stuff that he was talking about tracking housekeeping, social interactions, resource use, and mobility very much aligns with what we can anticipate coming, both with the biosecurity state and track and trace, as well as with this sort of sustainable development goals. And that is the technocracy element that Patrick Wood has talked about, inputs and outputs. So I find that this is a original document, and that's why, you know, if you have people who are interested, you know, have them check out my Twitter feed. For the most part, what I'm sharing are primary sources, so people can start to assess what is really out there, because these people believe that for the most part
by itself,
they're not going to be affected. Now, I will say in the space, we know that soldiers, both active duty soldiers and veterans, are a major point of experimentation for these projects. The neurological prosthetic projects a lot of them are being run through DARPA. In this talk that Giordano gave, which was only about an hour, so very worth your time, especially to go back and listen to it a couple times once you start to get the hang of what I'm talking about with simulation and modeling, is that they're using the armed services to test their protocols. And a lot of the neurological damage is both physical, but then also emotional and tied to post-traumatic stress disorder. So they're using the harm done to soldiers to further their research and development efforts in the neurological space. So Giordano speaks of 3 different projects in that talk, which I will sort of just walk through. I think these are in chronological order, so each one builds upon the last one. He talks about subnets. So the subnet project was about getting knowledge and technology to deliver relief to patients with neuropsychiatric illness. Okay, so that's looking at brain disorders, but they're at this early stage, they're developing the technology and the knowledge to do that. Then the next level is restoring active memory, or RAM. And in this program, they were developing wireless implantable neural interfaces for those problems. So they've developed the knowledge, they've got the technology. Now they've got the wireless neural interfaces for human clinical use. Now, I will say some of those actually aren't all surgical imposed, and that's where we'll get to with Liber, is that these aren't necessarily all Neuralink programs, interventions that require major brain surgery, that these are ones that are connected to nanotechnology that are much less invasive. So they are framing this as addressing people with brain injuries. And again, I would say that ties into what we know about research into athletic brain injuries, the football industry injuries, head trauma. A lot of that research is feeding into this as well. And then this last one is called the N3, Next Generation Non-Surgical Neurotechnology. And that's what I was talking about, is that these are not simply surgical, that these are much smaller scale interventions. And so the N3 program then wants to do high performance bi-directional brain machine interfaces. And so that is actually, this is not strictly for brain injuries or psychiatric illness, but actually for use in the battle space, and that people would be getting information and sending information through the neural interface while in a combat situation. You know, I think that is sort of where we're at this point. I don't know, they may have more robust other programs, but those are three that he mentioned specifically in that talk. Also in the talk, he talks about, actually this was a slightly different talk, but this is also Giordano, the caveats of collecting all of this biosensor data, particularly brain data, is that if you can assess it, if you can know it, that means you can access it. And if you can tag it, which is what they're working on doing with the biosensors, and I think will ultimately, some of the tagging will be done through blockchain electronic health records, then it can be targeted. And the target is a specific word that he used. People can be targeted with interventions. If you collect all the data in an interoperable way, it's much more easy to be hacked. And when you hack it, you can manipulate it. And if you can control the data, you can corrupt it. And so this is all in their very own words, is while we're talking about developing the Internet of Bodies, the Internet of Bio-Nano things, having us seamlessly integrated with sensor technology, they're also straight up saying that what we're doing is really highly dangerous, and we know that there will be problems with hacking and misuse. So in this space, let me see, this is my other bit. InBrain, a number of people had sent me some links to InBrain. Again, you can see they've got the hexagons again, which is the structure of graphene. Neuroelectronics is really big right now. And again, anybody who says for some reason we don't need to be paying attention to graphene, I would ask them how it is that they are asserting that, because neuroelectronics are really central in terms of the future human plus that is being asserted right now. So they're talking about decoding the brain and nerve signals, but that graphene, because of its conductivity, is a central part in this larger program. Again, you know, when you think about NTNT, when you think about what Giordano is saying about data aggregation, stacking, and manipulation, this goes way back. A lot of people are familiar with this, but I will share the slide deck if people want to go back and revisit so that all the links are in one place. The Sentient World Simulation, that was based out of Purdue University, but it was with Joint Forces Engineering Command. And the idea was that you would have a continuously running model for the world, and that you would be able to assess different scenarios. And just like you might have a computer-aided design software version of an engine, right? And you would design that engine, and you might actually even have an engine prototype built out, and that you would run a lot of different scenarios about how to what the optimum conditions were for having that engine at peak capacity, because a lot of this is Taylorist, you know, it's tied in with Taylorism, efficiency, scientific efficiency, that you could then use the data to feed it back into the actual real engine machine. And so they're doing this sentient world simulation at a global level, And I would assert that the systems engineering that Mitre Corporation is engaged with is very much tied in with the simulation and defense and threat analysis, which is increasingly connected into biosecurity and the biosensor data networks. But as Giordano has said, it's all hackable, accessible, hackable, compromisable, corruptible. And so they're asking us to do this not only for ourselves, but our children, all of the things on the planet, knowing that these things can go horribly, horribly wrong. Okay, so this idea of the brain as a computing system. This, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember. This is one of the, gosh, this has gotten out. Oh, Edward Boyden. Okay, so Edward Boyden is actually the mentor of the guy, Dan Novi at MIT, who wrote the dissertation on synthetic programmable hallucinations. Okay, so Edward Boyden is a professor at MIT, and he has done a lot of work on optogenetics, which I talked about last week, using light to control neurons in the brain. And so I want to sort of lay this out because I think it's hard for us to imagine that there would be people out there who would imagine living bodies as computing systems. But this is a quote from this paper that he's giving some background on optogenetics and sort of how he came into doing this work. And he says, much of my research had focused on the control of complex systems. So thinking about the brain as a computer system to be engineered felt natural. Okay, so that's an important context. There are people out there who imagine the brain is simply another computing system. Optogenetics, for example, spread rapidly in part because of the then increasing popularity of optics and viruses in neuroscience. So, again, whether or not we're looking at germ theory or virus theory, but they're imagining that they're using viruses and coded proteins, crystalline, to get in and code neurons to have them signal in a way that represents computing. In January of 2005, so this is again, thinking about the timing of this is 16 years ago, Carl transitioned from being a postdoctoral researcher to becoming an assistant professor, and he recruited a chemistry graduate student to make benign viral vectors that could be used to deliver genes, light-activated proteins into cells. And so again, we're looking at how they imagine a cell working is that they can code it with different crystals in water-based sources through what they frame as viruses. So within this context of imagining computing in the brain through different substances, that this is something that people have been thinking about for quite some time at the nano level. Some of these things are also involving bioengineering of bacteria. So using other living beings, we know that there's a huge amount of our body that is not what we would think of as us, right? Like, what are we? And if we say we're shapes of the earth, well, then I guess it would probably make sense that we're also shapes of lots of other things, including in our microbiome, bacteria, fungi, all sorts of other things that live in our universe that makes up our physical body as we know it.
Terrestrial.
We're our own cosmological being, right? And so they're looking at now engineering not only us as our own cells that we identify as our cells to our body, but things that are harbored on us, including bacteria. So they're looking at bioengineering E. coli to then enact changes that are linked to human computing interfaces. And this is really important, tied to the microbiome and gut health. So I'm just gonna read this out because I think it's important to understand us as, again, what is the story we're telling ourselves? I'm saying the story that they would like for us to believe, as John Trudell said, they would like for us to believe that they have the power. They would like for us to believe that this is the story that we should buy into, is that we can be programmed by viruses and programmed bacteria. But it's important that we understand their headspace, is that information computing theory, information communication theory is based on having a transmitter and a receiver, and there's communication. And in there, this is all happening through electronics and a coding that we understand the language. And so they're essentially attempting to use other beings to recode the programming of how our inherent electromagnetic system is working, and doing that through bacterial networks, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. But a number of the people that have been in touch with me have talked about being connected through fungal situations, bacterial, like different sorts of infections, but that those are linked with the nanotechnology. So this is them within the same paper talking about equating an engineered bacterium into a memory processor board of a control unit. right? And so I would say most people in the world don't even know any of this stuff is going on, that, oh, you would imagine that we would use bacteria to, you know, get into your body and manage you in these various ways through your gut biome and your brain. But that is indeed what they're talking about. And they want to make it normalized. And so within this, they've actually developed gamification to make it seem more fun. And that they've actually had developed like bio-digital games, like gaming platforms, to make this idea of hybrid living machines something that we accept and find as normal, without actually delving into the fact that this is all coming out of like military venture capital R&D. And oh, and look, this particular game was part of their smart city program. And this is something I just came through today, and I'm sorry if it's not more coherent, but I was adding a lot of new material. There's a lot of interest in microbiome, gut health, and brain health. And so this is an image from IEEE, which we know is involved in all of these different things, but that they're using the gut-brain axis and the vagus nerve, which is a very long neural system that connects your brain to your gut, is a central piece in this. And this is at Kilda's again at Georgia Tech. How do we create these biological Internet of Bio-Nano devices that will work within our digestive systems and connect into the nerves that then go to our brain? And so they are literally like, I mean, I can imagine why somebody wants to imagine that I must be a clown and making this up, and then I'm not telling the truth, but I'm telling the truth, right? I may not have the really robust, deep scientific knowledge to assess all of the aspects of this, but you know, this is framed, I think, as, you know, limited clinical usage, but I don't think that that's how it's going to stop. I mean, once you know that DuPont is part of this microbiome space, they're going to want to normalize this across all living things on the planet, just to really seamlessly integrate us into their electric universe. So these are things I think people have to think about.
Real quick, Alison,
Yeah.
sorry. I lost the recording. I just need to restart it. 1 second. I can grab what I'm missing though from the stream.
Okay.
Anyways, just heads up. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. This is just touching again on the in-brain neuroelectronics. And I think there's a lot of growth in digital gamification therapeutics, digital therapeutics, electroceuticals that are coming. That's something that's actually been in the work for about 15 years. And I would say, like, I would ask folks in the holistic medical practice space, because we know that we're electric beings and that people are used to using different frequencies in good ways to heal people, but that increasingly, as we become more and more colonized by engineered nanoparticles, and specifically ones that are electrically conductive, that bioelectronics is something that is also going to be commandeered by the corporate apparatus. Here, the in-brain electronics that's looking at mapping your brain is working on vagus nerve therapies with Merck, right? And this is coming out of Barcelona, Spain. So, you know, Barcelona, Spain is one of the smart cities. It is a center for graphene research. And like, we have to understand how engineering people's brain function and engineering their behavior and engineering them through frequency in smart city environments feeds in with social impact investing, and then ultimately this massive scale data harvest in the attempt to capture enough data to feed it into the AI to trigger the singularity. So I think I'm getting close to the end on this, but I will just, this is the slide where this person, Dan Novi, is defending his dissertation in January of 2019. And he has actually developed, you know, talking about developing programmable synthetic hallucinations towards a boundless mixed reality, because their goal is to have us not know who we are, have us live in a world of their own construct to their own ends that they can engineer in a two-dimensional way that is two-dimensional engineering. And, you know, essentially what they're talking about is bypassing any use of, like, current augmented reality requires like contact lenses or glasses, but literally projecting something straight into a person's brain, and that they will hallucinate that they are experiencing that. And it's not strictly visual, but it would be olfactory, sound, other things. And again, this is something that targeted people have been talking about for quite some time. This person came out of sort of the entertainment industry, and this was a mid-career change for them. But we have to, I think we really have to think about, when I say get clarity, is, and that this is a spiritual or a sacred engagement, is as we move forward, knowing that the plan is to make us more and more question one another, what we see as real, what we feel is our moral position in the world, and how we navigate that, knowing that remote neural control and hallucinations are part of the mix, and now much more widely available than back in the days of MK Ultra, where you actually literally had to physically torture people in a very programmatic way to accomplish these ends, now that they may be on demand. And, you know, there are really serious ethical questions about that. And I think, you know, some of this is really hard to sit with. But again, I think if we realize, and this is something that Cliff has made very clear, and I think he's going to articulate more firmly, that even though they can manipulate our physical mind, or that which is created out of our brain, is that our spiritual self, our sacred self, is ultimately untouchable and is always okay in this. And so I think we have to spend some time thinking about, like, really getting in touch with that side of things, and then knowing that if we are confronted with such technologies in the future, how can we support each other in navigating it? And I think some of that is that we get very clear about our purpose in this universe, in this life and time, and what we are here to do. And I think if we have clarity and conviction and a strong heart about it, and we're coming from the right place, that we will be able to come through whatever they throw at us. Okay, so this is from Sanctuary AI, talking about projective consciousness. You can see there's an individual up here moving their hand in the haptic suit and doing this remote robotics. So they're already imagining this idea that we could project our consciousness into this other thing, which means that they would like to control our consciousness. But ultimately, I think if we come with practice, that we will control it ourselves. Oops, sorry, let me click through. And that this is the storyline. Like, what's happening now is a narrative. If we understand that we're living through a story that we're telling ourselves, and that there's being woven around us, and that there are competing storylines, that the blockchain, they intend for the blockchain to track their storyline, and to create the digital twinning, to tweak us, to control us in this thing. And so we have to, that's why I think for me that the blockchain is the hard stop, and why I'm trying to be very firm about getting people to understand the immensity of what the blockchain is intended for, which is the portal to the metaverse. And once they own your digital twin in the metaverse, then they are controlling your story and controlling the part of you that lives in that space. If we allow them, if we begin to identify with our digital twins, if we begin to allow the way in which the digital twin functions in the metaverse to reverberate back to us, then we will be increasingly under the control of these systems. But I will just assert, yesterday, like maybe it was just yesterday, I don't know, time is like, what is time these days? You know, I was having a hard day. I had several difficult things happen. And, you know, I said, hey folks, and I've done this before, like, just put on your timeline something that you love or that makes you happy, because I think we could all use a pick-me-up. And this is one of the things that someone shared, is that they love to talk to the fireflies and the dragonflies. They appreciate the environment my yard provides, and they know they are well loved by me. And of course, I know all of this because they tell me so as they hover and flit about me. I never imagined how much joy it would bring me, and it kind of makes me feel like a carefree kid again for that moment in time. And so I would say, as we navigate all of this stuff, and again, I haven't hit into the depth of Mitre, is that we need to, in this moment of systems engineering, threat analysis, twinning, projective consciousness, is to try to live in the space of the fireflies and the carefree kid. Because I think in that space, that is the space that is not so under control of the defense contracting space. So I don't know, I'll take a pause for a second.
Yeah, so if you have questions, one person did ask, which we've kind of talked about before, you know, what can we do? I don't know if you want to readdress that again. We did talk about that last week a couple of times, but that's a perennial question that keeps coming up. You know, I think
I
that,
would say, like, use your gifts in unexpected ways. Use your gifts in unexpected ways that are coming from a place of care for other people and the world, because that's what the computer is not going to get. Like, I think that's the thing that was really interesting once I started to understand about behavioral economics. You know, they were trying to figure out the other elements to control that people didn't always act in their own economic best interests, right? This homo economicus, this idea that like everyone was just in it for themselves. And then randomly, some people would do things that were unexpected according to that constraint. And then the whole idea of behavioral economics, I think, will be linked in with the impact investing and the digital twinning to try to enforce the right behaviors, because people behave in unexpected ways. And sometimes those unexpected ways are not what you would want, but sometimes they could be what you want. So if you want to have agency in your space, like, what are your gifts? And then how can you be present with other people or in the world in ways that would like throw off the simulation? And to me, that's the sort of the unexpected beauty of still being human in this space, is that we can still do that, right?
yeah, I actually did another interview with Joseph Gonzalez the other day, which I'll be releasing. I'm actually going to release it in smaller, like bite-sized pieces, because we talked about a lot of disparate things. But one of the things that we talked about was this idea of situational awareness. And it's a military thing. In the military, you know, you need to have situational awareness. You need to be aware of your enemy and where they're at and what's all the things around you, and have a, you know, a real good comprehensive understanding, because the less that you have that, the more vulnerable you are. And I think that that's what we're doing here, is we're trying to become situationally aware. What is our situation? What position are we in? Even though it's difficult and it's hard and it's scary and everything, but you have to know that, okay, if nanotechnology is a part of this, that we need to be aware of it. If blockchain identity is going to be entrapping us into this system, we need to be aware of it. So I thought that idea of situational awareness was interesting. I'll release that clip. Joseph did a better job of explaining it than I am. But
well, we also talked about winning hearts and minds. Right? That was a part of our conversation, winning hearts and minds. And I think, but from a place of authenticity, right? Like, not necessarily an underlying motive. Like, I want to win you over because I want you to do this thing I want you to do. But what they most want is to enforce like the web of trust on blockchain, that somehow our humanness will be able to be trackable in that way. But I would say, how do you build relationships and hearts and minds in person through your gifts? Because I think that's what's going to count in the end. I mean, I say, I'm not showing up here saying you have any obligation to believe anything I say. I try to lay a lot of stuff out and say, like, this is how I think about it. But trust is something that's earned over time and with consistency, and knowing that people make mistakes and that we sort of pick ourselves up and move on. So, but I think bringing your gifts into the world in a good way and winning hearts and minds. And then at the end of the day, like, if we have the time we have, right? We're given the time we're given to do what we're tasked to do, which is, I think, live in a good way. So enjoy it. Like, try as much as you can do to enjoy it, because I think this is one thing. If you understand this idea of a predator energy would necessarily feed off of bad emotion, feed off of fear, feed off of angst. This is one thing that I want to just assert, is that there's and I'm not saying it's not reasonable, but we have to struggle against it, is to be angry against people that aren't behaving as we think they should be behaving. Talking down to like large groups of people and identifying them in certain ways. I think the talk of mass death is highly problematic, because in my analysis, I would think, if you agree that the idea is to get as much data as possible to trigger the singularity, they don't want to waste any of that, actually. And so they're going to potentially disable people or make people less strong to resist but like mass death in any sort of 3 to 5 year time horizon isn't something that really scares a lot of people and freaks people out, and again creates that bad energy. But they wouldn't have put all of these resources into building smart cities, building digital identity, building the biosensors, building all of these things, building the global capital markets, setting it all up, if they thought like within 3 to 5 years it was mostly going to be over. Because I don't think ultimately they want to trigger that sort of mass unrest. I think it is about controlling reproduction and other things, and I don't want to discount that entirely, but try not to stay in this place of like abject terror or wishing it on other people. Where would we want to be that we would somehow like want to assert mass death over our fellow beings? Like that actually doesn't feel good. We should ultimately, I think, if we're coming from a spirited place, believe that there are things that can intervene that we're not even aware of, and that even people who've made choices that maybe aren't the choices we would have made, that there will be ways of mitigating that, ameliorating that, finding other ways, wishing there be plenty of time for everyone to come to some realization of getting into a good place. Like that, I feel like is where we need to be at. And so I would just sort of say, you know, pay attention to who's telling what story, right? Because again, just like there's larger than life characters that want to capture everybody's attention and energy while things are going on behind the curtain. I do think from my conversations with Steffers is that ultimately biocompatibility with the nanotechnology is what they're after, at least in the short term. So mass death doesn't really serve that program so much. Like, I won't say that there's not going to be medical compromise that happens, but I don't think that that's the end game. In the short term, anyway.
Yeah, about things that you love, you know, one of the things that I've been doing to kind of keep me grounded, I guess, is I've been going camping a lot, and I've been going out to nature and just spending time with, you know, the other life on this planet. But I think that's really important to actually just step away from the technology and actually be with that which is being destroyed, essentially. You know, I don't know how else to put it, but you know, that's actually what's lets everything follow it, because you know we're bombarded with images and media and, you know, constant bombardment, and it clouds your clarity.
Yeah.
So I don't know, that's one of the things that I've been doing that I really love, is just to go out and just, you know, be in nature by myself.
I know, be in nature. Be in nature. I know. And it's important to remember to make time for that, because sometimes I do get caught up. And then we're living in their illusion. We're living in their storyline. So again, I don't always have the best balance of navigating the storylines. And sometimes I do worry about putting too much intention. Like, am I putting, are we manifesting some of these things by talking about them so much? And I don't know what the answer is. And nobody, like, there's not a guidebook for how to do this correctly. So I think
I don't believe that at all. I know that's been around for a long time. The idea that you're manifesting it by thinking about it or talking about it. I mean, it's clear it's happening whether you talk about it or not. I mean, I don't buy that theory, and I don't think that there's really any solid evidence to back that up. It's kind of,
I mean, I think some of it is, like, for me, is that if we know that peer-reviewed journals a lot of them are quite bunk, right? Like, that's what's said, like a lot of stuff in peer review isn't provable. How much of what's happening is actually real? And I don't have the technical expertise to evaluate, because they say that they've used protein crystals and optogenetics, that it's a true thing. And I'm not trying to assert it definitely is. What I'm saying is that people in positions of power are talking as though these are their intentions. And so I try to hedge it in that way. So I don't want to necessarily give them more power than they actually have earned. And sometimes I've talked with people who are whistleblowers in that space, and they're like, no, it's not, they talk about things, but they're not actually real. It's kind of like, the University of Chicago computer model of the virus they developed, like, just because it exists in a report. And I don't want to over assert my knowledge. I'm simply surfacing like patterns and trends. That's like the human AI.
yeah. Plus people market stuff. They're gonna they're going to inflate their thing, and because they're trying to get funding, right? They want to get
Right.
they want to get money for their project. So yeah,
Well, that's
hopefully
like
hopefully
the
there's a
whole,
lot of
like,
bullshit in
bioweapons,
some of the
like the
stuff.
whole like viral biowarfare thing. And I'm like, wait a minute. Well, if we're doing terrain, like maybe that's not a thing. Well, what was that? Like, was that just a whole bunch of money that went somewhere to like poof, you know, like, and of course they're going to keep writing the papers because they're, you know, they want to keep getting the money. So, yeah, I guess we have to have some discernment, but it's like, hey, heads up, if you start seeing like, you know, experiencing certain things, like it may have something to do with nanotechnology.
Yeah, I'm less sure about a lot of the nanotechnology in terms of where they're at and, you know, how far they're along they are, than I am about the fact that like they do want to put us onto a digital ID and to track us and to monitor us and to control our lives through. I mean, we see what's happening with the pandemic. You know, already, you know, we already see it manifesting itself in terms of putting these massive, heavy stipulations on people's ability to just go about their lives. So, and then you add in the financial element to it. And then the other piece of it I'm actually working on, I'm going to do another show with John Titus here coming up, but the monetary piece is another huge chunk of this that needs to be incorporated more into it. If you have questions,
they want to track how you use all your money. That's more data that they want, so they can identify you, know how to target you.
well, it's beyond with the money thing. It's beyond just tracking you because it's programmable, and you know, it's smart contracts built into your actual money. So it's pretty terrifying.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad you're going to talk about that.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm trying to see if there's any other questions. I've kind of been following. I'm not seeing any questions, just comments. If you have any other questions, you've got a couple of minutes to throw them out there, or I don't know if you had more.
Keep going, and then
yeah, you have more. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect.
So
we'll come back.
Yeah, and now I'm going to finally get into Mitre Corporation a little bit. So this is just touching on. I didn't get a chance to talk about it in Utica, but yeah, I was corresponding with some folks not so far away in Rome, New York, also upstate, and so you know, here's just a map. The Graphene International Utica Rome Airport. Mitre Corporation is up here. It's right next to the U.S. Air Force Research Laboratory. So again, as my friend Richard had said, they will control you from the air. That's their advantage, is controlling from the air. So the Air Force is a key player in the radar and frequency space. And so there's this overlap with Mitre, U.S. Air Force, but there's also BAE Systems has a facility there, and a couple of other space technology, cyber technology systems were local, so it was locally relevant. Just as far as a brief history of what Mitre was, again, it was a nonprofit company. It started in 1958, and it was spun out of MIT, and it was around national security concerns related to the Cold War and air defense. And so a big piece of the early systems was SAGE, semi-automated ground environment. So it was the radar systems, and it's interesting, you can see here in the image was an operator using a light gun, you know, in this terminal. So so Mitre came out of this Cold War environment. Again, I think I went over this slide before. They're here now solving problems, everything from air traffic control up to the makeover of Medicaid and Medicare. Every single thing that we're talking about today, sensor technologies, nanotechnology, blockchain, virtual reality, pandemic threat assessment, it's all built into Mitre. So now I'm going to do another clip from Giordano, same webinar. This is about digital twinning. And again, remember, he was talking about building up a very granular set of data, from brainwave data all the way down to your body and your social interactions and how you function in society, and then feeding this into a threat analysis. And again, understand this within a Cold War context, within the context of, you know, essentially, I think picturing people as individual threats to this rolling out, you know, biosecurity state.
But what big data allows is for much more of a temporally broad palette, literally from birth to grave. And that palette needs to then be accessible accessible and articulable in relatively real time. So if I'm going to know about you for reasons that are important to your personalized and or precision health, well, then those data have to be about you, and I have to be able to retrieve those data about you with your name on it, with some fingerprint, footprint, data print that allows me to de-anonymize those data and use them in a way that is specific and precise for you. With these data allow us to use maximized storage, engage parallel computing, work in ways that are scalable and customizable and accessible and shareable. Accessible and shareable by the users and by the custodians of these data. And some of that shareability is legitimate shareability, and others may be somewhat more cryptic. But what this allows is a tremendous capability in data acquisition and tracking across domains that go from the cellular all the way to the social, across levels from individuals to populations, across geographies, allowing relatively complete geospatial access at any real point in time, which is part of the point, to be able to pinpoint this person is here at this particular time doing these things, and we can relate that spatio-temporal reality to various factors of their past in terms of physiological characteristics, behavioral characteristics, social dynamics, ecological dynamics, genotypic characteristics, and in so doing, utilize these data engines in a pattern generative predictive way, which then allows us to work across time and to work across groups. Not only in a comparative way, but to determine certain norms, abnorms, and to affect those norms and abnorms, and the way the normal and abnormal are regarded and treated in a variety of circumstances and situations, from the quotidian to the critical, from the private to the public, from the medical to the moral.
All right, so that's another weighty section there.
I just gotta say, Giordano's voice is like knives in my stabbing me in my ears.
I know he says it in such a perky way too, right? Like, oh, but I mean, like, so he's saying this in August 2020. So, you know, the whole track and trace, everything is up and running, and it's clearly said in that context. And I think it's really important that people understand that the whole narrative around precision medicine, personalized medicine, which is not unlike personalized learning, which is something I'm very familiar with in coming into this from the education space. This is all going to be tracked on your electronic health record. And that's something that Zeke Emanuel was a central figure in setting up under the Affordable Care Act, the digital records and the electronic records. And I think I said previously that the state of Delaware is a pioneer in blockchain electronic health records. And of course, there's the Boyden connection there, as well as corporate, incorporation purposes, all these companies that are incorporated in Delaware. So this idea of your precision health data in real time that is linked to predictive analytics, not simply about you, but about whole populations, and that it can be manipulated, is pretty intense. Right? I mean, I think that's something that people really need to understand as we wade into this idea of, medical tracking systems that are tied to sensor networks that are not just wearable technology, which is where I was, a couple of months ago, but really linked very deeply to the biosensor and the connection to graphene. That is heavy stuff. And once the predictions are made, it's not simply about threat assessment, which again is where Mitre was. It was always about, scanning the horizon and imagining what the threats were out there. That was in the nature of, planes dropping bombs or nuclear missiles, but that now our bodies are the potential, are being viewed as weaponized systems against society in some way, against the technocracy, against the smart city polis that is coming, and what that means for us. It's pretty insidious. Whoops, sorry. Okay. So Mitre, 1958, came out of MIT, the War Machine. The head of the board of trustees of Mitre was a gentleman whose name was H. Rowan Gaither Jr. He was the head he also was the chair of the Ford Foundation. And so anybody who has any knowledge of activism in the nonprofit space knows about the role of the Ford Foundation and its outsized influence. So the fact that Gaither was doing not just the Ford Foundation, but Mitre is very significant. Other players in that, in helping get it set up was the Director of Military Engineering at Bell Telephone Laboratories. That person actually became the president, and that the offices would be in the Air Defense Systems Integration Division. Okay, so it's Mitre, even though it is a separate incorporated entity as a nonprofit, that it was working hand in hand with the Defense Department. And in some ways, then that makes it accountable not to the people who might have some oversight over elected officials and the Defense Department, but it's hands off and it's handed over to the influence of philanthropy and technology interests. Okay, so this was evolving out of, after several studies, was the development of this, but it's definitely a defense apparatus that is not accountable to the citizenry of the United States. So the other important element about Gaither was that he in partnership with William Draper III and this person named Anderson that I can't find out much about, but they actually developed the first venture capital firm on the West Coast. And so we know really venture capital was sort of birthed out of the commercialization of a lot of the research and development of World War II in the greater Boston area. So that was focused like venture capital in greater Boston, which is something I learned when I was working in the ed tech space. But essentially Silicon Valley as a venture capital hub, Gaither was in on the ground floor with that, with Draper, which is really significant. Knowing that as we're moving forward, the place where they were based, which is Palo Alto, is now Nippon Telegraph and Telephone that is advancing the digital twinning, just set up their own research innovation lab in Palo Alto as well. So the money of setting up and essentially a whole cloth creating Silicon Valley in this Cold War construct is important. This is again just touching on Gaither being on the board of RAND and on the board of the Ford Foundation. And he was actually part of this blue ribbon panel that said that the Ford Foundation now needed to become an international philanthropy. So that is Gaither's position in this. And then his partner, again, so RAND is advancing today the Internet of Bodies and working on pandemic insights and managing the Internet of Bodies in relationship to a perpetual pandemic state. And the Ford Foundation is a major player in the impact investing space. They have $1 billion being put into mission-related investments. They're clearly involved in response to the lockdowns that have happened and the global economic shift that is underway. On the left is an image. This is from the Sustainable Development Goals, their partnerships. And there were many listed, but the Ford Foundation is at least part of the data for sustainable development. So again, this is the legitimating the sensor networks that are going to pull in the impact data to feed the hedge fund markets and trigger the singularity, and the Sustainable Development Goal Philanthropy Platform, which again is using philanthropy, foundation money to essentially as seed money and to get all of these markets started as the sensor networks are getting up and running because they're not quite ready at this point. Let's see. Oh, just on the climate, this is an aside, but Steffers had sent me this, just the emphasis that the sustainability narrative that is again connecting post-pandemic with rebuilding with climate justice is that the build back better, a lot of people point out like the 666 structure, the hexagonal structure, which is the structure of graphene, that the building block of sustainability is being built on graphene, and a lot of it is linked into smart electronics, efficiency around electrical systems. So, I imagine more and more the historic fabric of buildings in cities like Philadelphia will be set up as impractical, and that they will be doing sort of 3D printing, sensor technology based alternative housing that is the stack and pack model that we see in a lot of predictive profiling movies, including Ready Player One, but that graphene here is already being identified as an anchor of sustainability. William Draper was the partner with Gaither. Again, a legacy of venture capitalists, all the way up to his grandson now, Tim, who is the one who says we no longer need any sort of nation states, will all just live as digital avatars. And he was a key hand in getting all of the e-government set up in Estonia. And that his grandfather, William Draper III, who was partners with Gaither in Silicon Valley of getting it onboarded, was the chairman of the Import-Export Bank for a number of years, and the head of the United Nations Development Program. So none of the sensor network tied to impact investing and data analytics should be surprising here. I didn't get any information on Anderson. I couldn't figure out who he was, but I'll see if I'll keep working at it. Gaither actually developed a report that was given to Eisenhower after the launch of Sputnik. And it's interesting if you sort of imagine, like, it's not this similarity of this spheroidal construct of like essentially remaking society according to its presence in the world, right? So you've got Sputnik, and now we have this, computer model simulation, pandemic thing in there. But they're these round objects appearing, and then life is never the same after that. So what Gaither was he was emphasizing the inadequacy of U.S. defense to protect from the nuclear attack from the Soviet Union, okay? And so that they needed to put all of this money into this high-tech system of, the SAGE system against the anti-aircraft and missile system, which essentially was the go-to to weaponize the environment, create all of the electronics, including the nanoelectronics that we're going to be dealing with now. And it was, in that respect, it made me just think, was the Cold War in any respect what we thought, or was it really the beginnings of sort of the secret space program that Catherine Austin Fitts, among others, and Alana Freeland has talked about? It was Fred Anderson. Okay, so Fred Anderson and Gaither, they're setting up shop in Silicon Valley. They've got, there's the Sputnik trigger event. That's the trigger event, just like, our trigger event. Nothing will be the same. Everything has to be different. Everything is going high tech, this new level of technological innovation at this point. At least you can still see the technology. It's not at a scale that is not sensible to the human eye or ears or anything like that. And so it's interesting that their firm, which was it was created specifically to invest in technology, started out in Santa Clara. And Santa Clara is really important to me because my first tippy-toed into the social impact space was with a friend who lives in San Jose. And we were finding out that all of the pilots for the human capital social impact bonds were happening in Santa Clara, both in early childhood, early literacy, homelessness, and mental health. And this is really important as we understand the neurological aspect of this. But Gaither being in Santa Clara is significant. Mitre was part of the early ARPANET. Like, as we know, it was in the 1960s, but by 1971, Mitre had its own node. So along with Stanford, UCLA, MIT, Harvard, Carnegie, which I think is Carnegie Mellon, Urbana-Champaign, you've got a couple of these others. You've got SRI, and it's interesting, Utah is just Utah, right? So we know that Utah is playing a significant role in all of this, the biotechnology space too. It's interesting that Utah is just called Utah. But in these defense contracting academic spaces, that Mitre is part of being woven into the web of frequency internet analytics there by 71. Mitre in the early 1990s took over management of the defense contracts to Jason, which is essentially really high level scientists, like top secret super science research programs. It was originally under SRI, but then Mitre took it over. And among the Jason things that they're working on artificial intelligence in healthcare. But in one of the early phases in 1992, they were already developing this global grid study and looking at GPS coordinate systems using orbital assets, so the satellites that were again put up as part of the preventative protection measures to create an inventory and a database of all man-made structures on the Earth. So this is 1992, and then about 10 years later, we get Keyhole and the beginnings of the GPS systems that are now being used for track and trace and geofencing. And this is a bit of an aside, but I would just say in the overall simulations, it's important to remember that Mitre Corporation in 1993 actually did the environmental impact analysis for HAARP, which is the Alaska-based ionospheric heating technology system that is being used for weaponized weather systems. And so Mitre's tentacles are into everything from the GPS systems also into weaponized weather simulations. They were a key player in military simulation. That's part of the threat analysis and the gaming. This report is from 2017. It's important to know that Mitre is a player in mixed reality, augmented reality spaces and gamified spaces. They were developing synthetic training environments for the military, but again, this is all dual use. So it moves from defense interests into both entertainment, Hollywood, media interests, mixed media interests, into then commercial applications like here, use a mixed reality holographic program to learn how to be an apprentice to, get a certification for your human capital bond program. And so the virtual reality element is part of Mitre as well. And you can see here, it's they were talking about the Milgram's virtuality continuum, everything from the real environment, which is what we're used to full on virtual, but along the way is augmented reality and augmented virtuality. So the idea of actually projecting synthetic environments into your consciousness. Just touching on, they were the beginning of systems engineering both machines, people, and societies. And that is all of what the big data crunching is about, is engineering total information awareness and full spectrum dominance. They want to control it all, and they want to control it all through the data analytics. Here is a map that I made. It should have been closer up in the mix, but just talking about the smart city pilots in San Jose and how they link to the social impact finance bonds in Santa Clara. And this is an old map I have, but I just wanted to pull it out. San Jose and the Santa Clara County Office of Education, they actually have something that I think is a basis of digital twinning in play, and it's called Data Zone. And so this was developed with the Packard Foundation, and they went into low-income communities, Latino communities in San Jose, and they started collecting all sorts of data analytics on the kids in an interoperable data warehouse. Everything from foster care, social emotional learning data, pre-K data, juvenile justice involvement data, all of the data together. And then in that space, they were also starting to look at the community school model and getting telehealth centers and healthcare centers into the schools. I think not necessarily to make things better for those families, but to aggregate more and more biosensor data. It probably isn't yet biosensor data, but to lay the groundwork for a vast overreach of data collection through Data Zone. And the importance of Data Zone is that now I think it's over 500,000 children's data is in that warehouse, but that it fed into something called the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust that was originally National Science Foundation money, but was then scaled with Chan Zuckerberg. So Mark Zuckerberg and his wife Priscilla Chan, they scaled it, and then they embedded it within the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust and the National Interoperability Collaborative, which ultimately feeds to the fusion centers. So once you understand the threat analytics and Department of Homeland Security, having all of this data from like even your pre-K experience feed up the food chain into the fusion centers is pretty unsettling. But of course, it's all being done, framed as equity, justice, closing the digital divide, and helping people out. But that's not what it's actually about at all. And within San Jose, there's a heavy presence of Bloomberg Philanthropy, smart cities, 5G small cell deployment, and Facebook was doing test projects with like alternative delivery of broadband signaling there in San Jose as well. So lots of stuff going on in Santa Clara. So it was very interesting to me to peel back the history and realize that Gaither and Mitre and the systems engineering was specifically linked to these militarized venture capital firms that go right back to the very origins, the very foundations of Silicon Valley. And so I want to reassert, when we're talking about this, this is a global project, but we cannot be finger pointing in a lot of here in the United States in a lot of different directions, because this sort of situation that we find ourselves in is very much homegrown, and it has been since forever. I mean, in this talk, at least since World War II, but even earlier than that, the technology piece. Jason is also now, Mitre is working, is managing the Jason contracts, which I think have been put on hold or were put on hold under Trump.
Mitre is not managing me. I'm sorry. This is not.
No,
this is just you're going overboard now.
Evil Jason. No, you're not a fan of Mitre at all.
I'm gonna go grab some coffee. I'll be right back.
All right, you can grab some coffee. So the Jason scientists who are working on the top secret reports, some of which are released, some of which are not released. But as of 2017, they actually specifically were working on a specific report on artificial intelligence for health and healthcare. So again, think of it within the context of what we know from Giordano, what we know about graphene brain interfaces, what we know about ultimately wanting to hack into the code of life. They want to frame all of this as precision medicine tied to your blockchain health record. And they want to frame it under social determinants of health so that they can make bank on these impact markets of attention, essentially trying to improve data analytics around the health outcomes of populations, Black and Brown communities that have been targeted by various levels of trauma, from environmental racism to economic injustice to, physical violence and outright violence and erasure and any number of, genocidal tendencies. But now to use the data of that epigenetic trauma to then tweak them in terms of on a data dashboard to make it look good for investors. But really it's about expanding data surveillance of those populations. And so that is what is coming. It is framed as social determinants of health, which is, again, please understand, I am not in any way saying that those health disparities do not exist. They definitely do. That trauma, like community trauma, doesn't have very significant impacts on community health. I believe that wholeheartedly. But I think what is being set up by these artificial intelligence healthcare systems is not about healing people, but is managing people as a data asset within these social impact pathways and biosensor data aggregation. And some of it is wearable technology, some of it is going to be smart shoes and smart shirts and brainwave headbands and Fitbits, and that's where it's at now. But believe me, they're all about patient compliance. And if they realize that you're doing stuff and you're not going to wear the Fitbit, then they're going to find some way to get the Fitbit into you, right? And that is where the engineered nanoparticles are and where the biosensors are. So within the AI data training set, they want as much data as they can get. So what they're saying is that their aim is to get information about a person's economics and tie that into healthcare. So their employment, debt, expenses, medical bills, that's all data points that they want. They want to know about their physical environment and their neighborhood. Again, more surveillance, housing, transportation, parks, playgrounds. They're all saying that they're here because they care, but really, I mean, you heard Giordano, they're interested in figuring out what resources that you use and how to target you. They want to know about education. So those are all very straight up impact markets, everything from early childhood to vocational training, which is lifelong learning on the blockchain. They want to track your food access. So they want to track hunger, because that's Sustainable Development Goal 2 for impact markets. And they want to track your access to quote unquote healthy options. But then the question becomes, are the healthy options that are presented that are somehow bioengineered to what they say is your genomic sequence? And so you will be limited to a GMO food products. They want to look at the overall social construct. So social integration, community engagement, discrimination, and the healthcare system, including cultural competency and provider availability. So, I would say, folks, you need to look at the new norm of healthcare delivery. It is like, a lot of it is going to be telemedicine, teletherapy that melds with the nanomedicine, nano biosensor, healthcare delivered by your phone, healthcare increasingly delivered not in consultation with a real person, but with an algorithm or an avatar with this synthetic human being, where the consequences of your interactions with those AI entities may be very significant in terms of whether or not you get geofenced, what kind of food you have, what kind of, like if they take your children away from you. There are many, many things that are happening here in this particular slide that are melding in both Jason and the Mitre Corporation in this. Very important to make the link between the threat assessment and the SAGE analytics and the AI healthcare. Jason, are you still away?
I'm here.
Oh, so I was just gonna have a pause if you need to take a bathroom break or whatever.
No, I'm good. I've been having breaks. I've been breaking it up here. It's been great. No,
I'm sorry for saying mean things about the Jasons, but I have to say, like, you know, I often recommend Alana Freeland's books, and her series Sub Rosa America is kind of a fictionalized story of the deep state, but it has a lot of really good information, and sort of one of the main characters is modeled on like a Jason level scientist who like broke away. So, you know, some of those reports are online and available, and it's really useful to see of the ones that are publicly released, the titles of those reports and which ones are available, like what the government is spending our money on because a lot of it has to do with biosecurity and managing healthcare.
Okay, so we have a couple. I have 3 questions.
Okay.
And if you have more while we have this break, go ahead and post them, and I will ask them. And if I miss your question, post it again, because I might have missed it. How much digital interaction do they need to create this twin?
I mean, it's interesting. There are some things that I don't know yet. And I mean, that's why I'm kind of opening this door, hoping other people will do some more research. I mean, like I said, I've been in communication with people who talk about being subjected to various forms of remote sensing and manipulation technologies. So it seems like that they would be the people who would be in the best position to speak to that. I mean, unless there are whistleblowers who are actually in the rooms where they're, you know, in the sentient world simulation or whatever the equivalencies are of the Giordano. I know a number of people have said they've straight up asked Giordano, like, how do I find out if I'm part of this experiment? Like, how do I find out if these things are happening to me or if there's a digital twin? And they, of course, they never answer that piece of it. So right now, what's happening is that our data is like regular people's data is spread out all over. And I'm not saying it's great. I'm not saying it's great that Google has your data or Facebook has your data. Clearly it's problematic. But what's happening with blockchain is what they want to do is they want to sell you on privacy and say, you know, come, we'll let you own your data, and then we will have it all in one place, and that you can be the gatekeeper of your data. But like, based on what Giordano says, is I think there's no presumption that even in a blockchain format that your digital twin data is going to be secure or not misused towards some end, because it seems very clear that they're all about getting the data analytics to do the social simulation model. So I don't know how much is how much. There may be people who have very robust ones and not. I mean, to me, that's why we need to stop the blockchain integration, because once we get to that point, I think the data will rapidly accrue in combination with biosensors and wearable technology.
Okay. Do you think the spike protein, the weaponized spike protein narrative is a lie?
I mean, I'm coming at things from the terrain theory perspective. I think, like I said, I think there are other things happening that are more aligned with frequency weapons. And I have to say Steffers has a whole piece that talks about, like, llama is in the title on a piece of Mindful. And I have to admit, like, I need to sit with it more because it's very technical, but essentially it's looking at other kind of like nanolipid particles. That is something that is very different from the generalized narrative about this spike proteins. So my position at this point, and which is not to say it can't change, but I feel like the focus should be on examining the graphene or other nanoelectronics as relate to either, you know, this vaccination, future vaccinations, other injectables, because it's part of it, than a certain direction, because if what we want to do is heal or detox or be preventative, we actually have to know what the thing is. And at this point, I think I'm not in a position that I think it's a virus. I think for me, it's looking at the frequency in nanotech. Now, not everybody's necessarily going to be with me on that, but I think if people are still staying with certain narratives, to what end? To what end is it? So.
Okay, so the next one is, do you suggest we de-Google our phones and get OGG FB? I don't know what OGG is. Maybe they meant to say, I think they meant to write off Facebook.
Oh.
Could that stop them?
Well, I mean, guys, if you've been paying any attention, it's essentially we're going to weaponize the atmosphere, everything. They're going to weaponize the environment. So, their plan is that the devices as we understand them will disappear, and it will simply, it's like when they talked about early electricity. I live in a 1885 row house, and we had gas, not me, but the house had gas lines before it had electricity, and there's still sort of presence, but eventually the electricity went into the wall. And for the most part, you don't actually think about it anymore. And so what they're saying is that the next generation, the spatial web, is that the internet, such as we understand it, will just disappear, and we won't be activating it through any kind of screen-based technologies. It will simply be our consciousness with these nanoelectronics. You saw the cyborg botany, them patting on shrubbery. So I think, if you're in a position to not need a phone and to remove yourself off of the internet, like, go for it. I think that's great. Not everybody can do that. Clearly, I feel like I'm using these tools, which isn't great, but at the same time, I'm not sure, unless I should just go like unplug and, do ritual or something, which I mean, may be right. And I'm not saying I have the right answer on this. Like, I'm still in this. And I think if you understand that the goal is to take it off of platforms, then simply saying, oh, if we all got rid of our phones or got a different phone, it would go away, is misunderstanding the scope of what's actually happening. Because we're going to be the computing device. What I'm trying to tell you is that we're going to be the computing device. That is their intention. We are likely going to be their battery devices as well. So that's why I'm trying to surface these bigger conversations, because that's as messed up as the phones are. I don't actually want to become a non-consensual bioreactor for the matrix.
A couple of people have brought this up in terms of feeling defeated, feeling a sense of nihilism. How do you battle that?
I mean, we all have our good days and bad days, right? I mean, hug your kid, hug your husband, hug your partner, eat some good food if you can. Go take a walk, put your feet in the water. We're here for a reason, find people that you value and spend time with them, make music. Those are all things, live in the story that you want to live. I think, again, know that we have the power, they have an illusion of power. And so while I think it's probably naive to just pretend that illusion of power is not relevant, we shouldn't live in their illusion. We should do our best to have agency over the story that we want to live in, and live in it as best we can with the resources we have available. And to me, it seems like the most revolutionary thing that you can do against this is to find joy and be happy in unexpected ways, in spite of all the things that they're trying. I mean, to me, that's probably, my friend Roll says, create, it pisses them off. Go create something. They're deconstructors. They mess things up. Go make something beautiful. Go make something fun. Go make something unexpected. Be human. And because, be human as long as we can be human. And it may be, by the time all of this happens, if it happens, we won't notice. It's hard. I have a dad who's suffering from dementia right now, and it's terribly hard. But I don't know that in his space, his soulful self is probably not in the part that's being hurt. That's what I'm trying to sort of grapple with. So maybe if this thing rolls out the way, we won't even really get it. We'll be somewhere else. We'll be in our other consciousness by that point. So love while you can.
I have a question. How would you, and maybe this is something you'll have to work on or something, but like, could you describe what's happening, like the whole thing, not just the nanotech, but the digital ID, like the whole thing? Can you attempt to try to explain that in like a paragraph? What's happening?
I made the egg. Come on. I need a short version. So okay. So say we imagine that I don't know. This is ripping off what some other people have told me, but so like there's this terrible dream that has gotten dreamed out into the world, and it imagines that it wants to rule the universe, and to do that it wants to hijack our life into a system that will turn us into tools to accomplish that end. And it's happening through technologies that are unseen, and it's happening through long histories of using money and technologies as powerful systems of control. And so it's kind of a very old story of domination that's happening. It's just a new version. And because we can't quite see what the tools are that they're using, and we're navigating a lot of confusion, we can't see it for what it is. But if enough of us could wake up out of that story and find a way to heal the hurt parts of the histories, then maybe we could get to a new place that's outside that bad dream.
I'm sorry, you need to answer it in the form of a question.
I mean, that's like in broad themes, like that's what, like there's this egregore of these histories of domination that we're dealing with, and the tools keep changing, and some of it's putting us in a game, and it's to profit the military industrial complex and the hedge funds, and they're going to put us through our paces, and they're going to try to learn us from the inside out and the outside in. But like, we're bigger than that. Like, we're shapes of the earth. We belong to something bigger than what they're trying to reduce us to. And so like, I think if we can wake up into our beingness, then we're incredibly powerful. Like, and I think we're intuitively powerful in a way. We may not be able to like lay out the quantum physics equations of how we move the world with our mind, right? Or how we express intentions, but there's something very powerful in life on this planet. And that I have to think that if we come at it from a place of trying to attempt healing in the face of a really barbarous program, that the universe will respond.
Yeah, one of the things I hear a lot is like, I'll point something out that's happening now, and people say, well, the ruling elite have always tried to do this, or they have always tried to do this. So on one hand, they're right. Like it's like this is part of a continuum. It's been going on for a long time. There are people in this world that want to dominate others for whatever reason. You know, we can have that discussion. But there is something unique about this particular time and place, I think, as well. As so, you want to talk about like connecting it to the past, connecting it to slavery and colonialism and these previous versions of systems of domination, compared to like specifically what's like this time and place is very unique and prescient. Do you want to say something about that?
I mean, I guess I'm still grappling with things like, based on talking to Cliff earlier this week, is like, what are we and what is this thing that we're in? And I'm not trying to be coy about it, because I think the more you look into the science, and maybe that's like when you go to the nano level, everything you thought you knew about the world isn't what it says. Like all the rules, the physics, everything is different. And so if we are both existing in our material self and at the nano level at the same time, what is the real, right? Like what is the world that people are living in who watch mainstream media or even alternative media is actually different than the world I'm living in, because I'm consuming, like, my reality is constructed from different pieces. They have certain pieces they're constructing their reality from, and I'm constructing it from other pieces. And we're both occupying a similar geography, but the way we see the world they experience the world could feel really, really different. So whose version is real? Like they're both equally real. And so I know that's kind of metaphysical, but like maybe this has all happened before. Like maybe, you know, like maybe that, you know, there's some reset button out there. Like maybe the game plays on and it's not so unique. It's just, this is, you know, there have been other versions and it's played out and then they've hit the reboot, you know, like the Omedear network, you know, off on button. So I don't know how unique it is. I'm sure that the people who were experiencing attempted genocide in other moments felt like their moment was also super unique. So I don't know, like maybe that's not a good answer, and I would have answered it differently a few weeks ago, but that's where I'm at now, is that if there are lots of uncertainties, why don't we use the uncertainties towards something that makes us feel better? Like know it, like I'm not saying, like to me, that the quest for me as I see it is like face down the story, face the thing, and then in facing it say, nope, not, you know, that's not how it's gonna go. We're the power, you have the illusion. But you actually have to own the illusion, otherwise you let them keep their illusion of power and domination over everyone else.
Yeah, I had a similar experience with once I started to understand money and like I'm like all the political conversations that everyone had happened were totally irrelevant. You know, once I understand like they have the power to create money at will and extinguish and create debt at will, it's like that all these discussions about taxation and distribution, you know, kind of don't, it's all of, you know, it's all manufactured. So it's like trying to have those conversations in these spaces where people were still trying to have these political conversations that were being manufactured and mediated by the media was very difficult for me. And so I could see I'm still trying to wrap my mind around this whole nanotech thing, and the role that that's going to play. But yeah, there are certain things that basically we all have. I've talked about this before, but we all have a foundational worldview that we stand upon, and then we build from there. And then you know, someone comes along and starts to threaten your foundation. You know, people hold on to it. They're like, no, I built up all this stuff on top here. I can't let go of it. So I think that's one of the tasks and challenges for us, is to say, yeah, maybe I need to rethink the actual ground that I'm standing on.
Yeah. And sometimes if you rethink it, like new possibilities open up that you didn't realize were there. I mean, I think that's, I mean, you know, if the core of our being is always sacred and safe out there and it is presenting in different, you know, scenarios, then that gives you, I mean, you know, that, I don't know, it's a different view. It's a different view. So maybe if what they're trying to do is take over all your neurons, so maybe they took over your neurons, but are you your neurons? Are you something else? Like, and I think maybe what we are is something bigger than our neurons. Like they might think that they can use our neurons to, in their weaponized technologies, to twin us or to hurt things, but maybe in the platonic ideal of us in the universe, it's always okay. It's always okay. So we should be brave in that and just speak our truth.
Someone asked, when do we stop becoming human in this?
I don't know. I mean, I used to like have a lot more firm thoughts about that. Like, I mean, you know, if the carbon nanotubes are probably in all of us to a certain extent. You know, in the one of the very first talks we had when you came like last summer, I was talking about marinage and escape, you know, and mental marinage. How do we hold on to our minds? And maybe the reality is that we can't, there's no guarantees in that in the material world, but we know that in the end, it's okay. Like in the end that they can't get at that they can't get at that piece, that sacred piece, that they can try, they can part around in there and like muck things up, but that the essence of ourself is somewhere back behind there where they're never going to get it. And that they're spell casting and things. I don't know. It's interesting. I was never good at philosophy or computing or finance or any of these things. I was actually a pretty materialist person. I liked built environments and you know, material culture. And now I'm like dealing in everything that is not that. But you know, I think we're as human as long as we believe ourselves to be human, you know.
I'm just looking to see if there's any more. Looks like a bunch of comments. It looks like it's just all comments from here on
Okay.
out.
Let me just go. I have a little bit more.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so this is just touching on this programmable synthetic hallucinations, right? And you know, when I think someone was saying like, oh, am I picking on this person? Like maybe they weren't really like, they didn't mean badly, but actually, and this is the dedication page of his dissertation where they're talking about neuroengineering hallucinations. And, you know, in his acknowledgments, he acknowledged a couple people who said, you know, thank you for helping me, even though you knew exactly how dangerous what I was attempting, but you never shied away. So they, you know, he's saying, you know, he's acknowledging, who knows if it's tongue in cheek, but that what he's attempting is dangerous, and that some of this work was done at the MIT Clinical Research Center, and he was thanking the nurses for keeping his subjects safe and keeping him from losing it. And for Epilogue Corporation, Epilogue, that's an interesting name, for making a laser cutter, I can play like a Stradivarius. Okay, so some of these things, again, if people want to like put a clown face on me and tell me that I'm silly for even talking about such things, I would just say, I would prefer not to have to talk about these things, but these are in our real and present reality, and ways that people are talking about the world. And so I think it has pretty deep implications for how we navigate our own stories. This is a person, and I just want to sort of touch again on the simulation, the digital twinning element with Giordano. This is a person who, actually, where I will put him on my radar, and I was like looking at him, his LinkedIn, going back to sort of the work that I do with LinkedIn profiles. He got his start at Mitre, only for a couple years in McLean, Virginia, but then was working at MIT with something called Near Life. Near Life, there's a gentleman involved in this that now works for Curious Learning, which is app-based learning engineering that is attempting to go global. And Near Life actually was doing patents for interactive television, that you could like insert yourself in the television program. He went on then to work for gaming companies, Irrational Games and BioShock for 11 years, and then on to investment companies, 10 Financial Systems. And so you can sort of see this through line. I thought was really helpful to see how you go from systems engineering and threat assessment straight through to technology, media, interactive media programming, gaming, video game design, and then on to finance, which is gaming, but within sort of a, you know, a simulation risk analysis profile. 10 Financial Systems, again, they were working on financial asset management. And he actually, this person, Christopher Klein, a couple years ago wrote a whole article on LinkedIn about why he thought that video game designers were so good in the finance industry, and how many similarities there were between gaming simulations and the finance world. And so if we just back that up into understanding that it's the military simulation, then on to video game, like interactive media, video game design, and finances, that we can see how putting you know, children onto ed tech apps, or poor people onto performance tracking apps, or other wearable technology apps, that these are militarized systems that allow people in power to game the system. BioShock was one of his games that he helped develop while he was at the gaming company. And I thought it was really interesting that they actually got the idea walking around Rockefeller Center, and then the storyline of the BioShock game was around John D. Rockefeller, right? So they're always telling you sort of this free market world that was set up based on Rockefeller's story. So it's very, you know, appropriate that that's sort of the trajectory. And then I would just say, in the gaming, again, on the ed tech, this is a video I would really encourage you to watch. This is the first ceremony that anybody did with dandelions besides me, you know, who's actually sent me documentation. This is in the Moonshot Project, in the lobby of the Moonshot Project, where they're setting up the digital twinning, but moving the world into a mixed reality, gamified environment that's run by the military. Those are key principles. And you can see in the lobby of the Moonshot Project, this is my friend and his toddler, and reading this revocation of digital twinning and transhumanism. But behind is this running loop that's emphasizing children and virtual reality headsets. And there's a koi pond as an image, this very like culturally significant image for Japan. And yet on the screen, it is all virtual koi in a virtual pond. And I think that actually might have been a near life patent. And the wargaming. So again, this is just hitting on Mitre Corporation again, working with DARPA on this synthetic theater of war, on the military simulation training, that it's all woven throughout. I'm going to just keep going quickly. Mitre is, I mean, this should be some red flags for those of you who follow me on social impact investing, that they have created a center for data-driven policy. Again, it's the simulation and the risk profiling, but this is all being framed in a bipartisan way as accountability, transparency, analytics. But now we know that data-driven really means feeding the board to trigger the singularity. Federal big data, again, so this is feeding into the conservative side saying that we want to hold government accountable, and the liberal side saying that we want people to have services. And it's all framed of, oh, if we put everything on blockchain and we engineer it, we'll get our money's worth and we'll make sure everything is accountable. This federal big data summit was in 2014. So this is well underway. We're moving into sort of the tyranny of the data analyst class that is all being conditioned through the Ivy League universities. There are consortiums who are setting up the data analysts. Not that they'll actually do the data analytics, but they'll set up all the legislation and all of the think tanks to push the data-driven government, the e-government solutions that are coming with the blockchain identity. It's important to know that one of the main cost offsets in this space is the prison industrial complex. In the social impact bonds, the first ones were very much centered on prison systems, the Peterborough social impact bond with Ronald Cohen, and the Rikers Island social impact bond with Michael Bloomberg. So Mitre is working with the judiciary now on enterprise solutions for more and more virtual judicial processes. And so they want to start to run the judicial system like remotely and with AI judging. And if you read the book, The Diamond Age, there's the whole beginning scenario. There's someone who's in a court trial, and it's increasingly sort of a very regimented data analytics framing of the justice system. So it's not just people getting tried for, and going through the trial system, but that it's also the inverse of not getting sentenced is part of the impact data, so that if they can connect with data-driven solutions tied to social welfare services to redirect people out of the prison system, that is going to drive the impact markets, and why I do not wish anyone to unduly be involved in the criminal justice system. The reality is that the main private prison contracting groups, CoreCivic and Geo Group and Serco, like they're pivoting into social work and continuum of care. So they're already ready for this open air digital prison that's coming tied to the geofencing. So this is just touching on, again, the Rikers Island social impact bond and the Peterborough social impact bond, both using the cost offset to justify the impact investing of prison. And so Mitre being integrated with data analytics and the judicial construct is really important. That's also a sustainable development goal, is around justice work, and Open Society and Soros have quite a hand in the data analytics IT aspects of that. Here we have Mitre modernizing healthcare, and we know what that means. And then right underneath, cybersecurity and security engineering and homeland security, right? So all of the healthcare modernization tied to Medicare and Medicaid is an outright threat assessment that is being framed as your body is now the potential weapon, even if you are healthy, according to the biosensor technology. They are running a very high level national security engineering and cyber defense. But as we know, James Giordano was always saying already, like, if it's stackable, it's hackable. If it's, if you can aggregate it, you can break into that stuff. So they're at the one time saying that they're going to give you precision healthcare and personalized healthcare and, in these, data analytics at the same time that they know that it's a true security threat. Hacking your body or your brain it's a tremendously scary prospect. Here is their, they've been working on the Medicaid for a long time. Here they're getting the renewal of their 5-year contracts on healthcare modernization through 2023. They have this whole division with the Department of Health and Human Services on the healthcare modernization since 2012. So this has been going on, like they've got a lock on it. It doesn't look like they're losing this anytime soon. And, it is based in their qualifications are cybersecurity and public-private partnerships and telemedicine and health IT. So that's what they're doing. It's mining the body for data. And that's exactly what John Trudell spoke of, is mining our minds. Here is patient coordination. And again, this is pushing so that more and more people will not have access to in-person care at all. And that is through the standardization. Eventually, you'll just get on your phone and you'll have whatever care provider based on their blockchain credentials competing for some sort of micro consult. Back in 2015, they were working on, again, social determinants of health tied to health disparities. And this is Mitre in underserved populations. So, we can see the very hardcore press on getting what they would identify as underserved populations in on the COVID injection program, like hard and heavy, really going door to door in those communities to get those people into the pipeline of ongoing health assessment and data analytics. And then the agenda of this is that they're looking at specifically the health disparities as a social impact investment. So again, this is hand in hand. The hedge fund data analytics goes with the e-government solutions, goes with the public-private partnerships, goes with the biosensor data, all to trigger, in the attempt to trigger the singularity, break the code of life, and rule the universe. But nobody sees all the way down the road. And that's why I think it's important to thread the pieces together and then seek to disrupt the intersections, to seek to show the broader agenda so that people will refuse it. Rural areas are also being targeted for telehealth. And I spoke with someone who is a state senator in Montana about issues that they were seeing about public-private partnerships. And Montana seems to be a partner in rural health with a patient toolkit tied to electronic records. So again, this is innovation being framed as access. Shouldn't it be that rural communities still get to have a hospital? You would think so, but not in the Internet of Bodies or the Internet of Bionano things. Broad-based data sharing. It's the data sharing that is what they want. One of the key players in this space that's connected to Stewards of Change and the National Interoperability Collaborative is this Healthcare Information and Management Systems Society. So if we understand systems engineering, health care information and management system society, it's huge. And they have hundreds of members throughout North America, Europe, the United Kingdom, the Middle East, and Asia Pacific. It's enormous. And they're building interoperable data platforms, ostensibly for better healthcare. But we know that ultimately all of the data analytics are being fed into the Department of Homeland Security fusion centers for the risk profiling and into these broader systems for AI. The same people who are building this whole thing are also doing the playbook to combat disinformation, right? So again, more data analytics. They're working on the impact of social policies. This is all what Mitre's doing. Their hands are in every single part. Here is their contract from March of 17th of 2020, like 3 days after the pandemic is called, to work on the track and trace systems for Homeland Security. So this all must be understood within the radar systems under the ostensible nuclear threat being now turned on the populace, the human populace of the world, to track them as a threat against this smart city polis that is being built. This is the COVID-19 Healthcare Coalition. These are all people who are working on data analytics tied to COVID. I mean, you can just see the interest in this. Amazon Web, Deloitte, Google, Microsoft, Salesforce, Slack, Tableau, but Mitre is in this mix, and they're the ones running the data dashboards. And what I'm saying is when Giordano says you can adjust the data in the digital twin simulation and then make that pivot in the simulation come out into the real world, we have been living that for the past year and a half, only people didn't really have the language, I don't think, to talk about it that way. but we have been living life according to a constructed computer model simulation that was set up by a militarized venture capital Silicon Valley web. And that is what we're living through right now. Of course, we know that all of the Internet of Bio-Nano things is running on the telecom infrastructure, on the small cell infrastructure, which is 5G, but eventually 6G and onward. Mitre, they have a whole Ingenuity platform that's working on 5G innovations. So that is a big piece of it. Drones, healthcare, and factory automation are their concentrations. So again, the stuff that is going to put us out of work, the stuff that's going to track our bodily function, and the drones that are going to do the surveillance are all part of the Mitre in the Mitre purview. They are working on the credential initiative for, the vaccine records. So here we see the phones. This is the stuff that everybody's out in the streets about today. It definitely is about the medical passports, but these medical passports were planned far beyond this immediate health threat. That this was being planned many years ago by the World Wide Web Consortium in this verifiable credential initiative for smart health cards. And the smart health cards were for biosensor data and digital twinning. This is the smart health card framework. Again, we would like to think that the internet is something wonderful that we use, but in many respects, the internet is using us, and it's using our bodies to reconstruct its own reality, and the health wallets are a part of that. And within the space, they're also working in augmented and virtual reality. Again, that goes back to the simulation. Mitre is involved in blockchain, surprise, surprise, right? They're trying to pilot it. They're trying to get people to adopt it. They're trying to encourage people to learn about it, to get it all in place, because the risk profiling, the simulation, the AI runs on blockchain. And keeping people in line, the drones are part of that. They're working on low-cost 3D printed drones. And if you imagine your biosensor data being connected with the ubiquitous surveillance state, I don't think that's too far off. Clearly, they're already doing predictive programming in the Black Mirror episodes with the tiny drones, the bee drones, like stinging people in their brains if they have a bad Twitter profile for the day. But that the price points of all of these things are dropping, and they're getting loose out into the world beyond the accountability of really any government agency. All of those agencies are captured. I think maybe we're getting close. So I had mentioned that these things, that the National Interoperability Collaborative, which is very central to follow, is with the Health Information Management System. They're feeding to the National Council on Crime and Delinquency, and they're feeding to the fusion centers. And that is both for impact data, for social impact projects, for cost offsets for criminalization, as well as for cost offsets around biosecurity threats and just profiling dissidents, with the goal that all of this data is being fed into the robots in this crazy, like Logan's Run scenario. I think I'll pause for a second. Actually, I do think I have one more chunk after that. Anybody have any? I can keep going if you want.
Yeah, let's see. We got, so far it's just.
I'm getting close.
Okay. Yeah, just go ahead and keep going, and then we'll do this at the end here.
All right. Well, okay. So I talked about Liber. It's really important to know that in the programmable matter space, the stuff that goes back to 1997 at least, that Harvard has always been in the mix, and Charles Liber has always been in the mix. And this idea of framing it as that this is something that is a problem with China is inaccurate, because Liber was working with Mitre on nano antenna and nanowires for decades before any of this happened with China. So this is a homegrown situation with the Internet of Bio-Nano things. Ellen Bogan is the chief nanotechnology guy for Mitre Corporation, and it's pretty amazing. Like, he has been with the company since 1984, so 37 years. He actually founded the Nanosystems Group in 1992. Okay, and so Ellen Bogan and Liber have been working together on micro nanoelectronics and wiring. When Giordano was talking about the steps from knowing about brain engineering technology to developing less invasive systems, and then eventually bidirectional systems, this is the kind of work that's being done by Liber and Harvard, where they're talking about mesh electronics where the device is so thin it can be directly injected into the brain where it attaches. And this is the mice experiments that we've talked about, that they can implant false memories and that they can create and disrupt social bonds. But this is the neural lace, right? The neural lace that fuses with your brain, which is more sophisticated than the neural link, which is what Musk is advancing. But it's talking about accessing previously inaccessible areas of the brain. Literally, this is someone from Rice, which is where we know they're doing a lot of the work on graphene and nanotech and quantum dots. They say plugging your computer into your brain becomes a lot more palatable if all you need to do is inject something. So yeah, what are we injecting, right? And do people even know that the possibilities of what things could be injected? The nano robots, this is an image of one of the ones, the Miller robot that Mitre had designed. You can see here on this image that the Libre Research Group, the sponsors include, in addition to Mitre, the Office of Naval Research, DARPA, the Air Force, and the National Institutes of Health. Again, just reinforcing the diamond age, programmable matter. They see us as programmable matter. They see us as talking animals that they can use. They can graphenate us, with their systems and bring us into their world. And then they're bridging innovation. This is all being framed as innovative, and they want to make us question ourselves. They want to develop this mixed reality, this augmented reality, where they can use their mesh networks to influence our minds and influence how we see the world and make us uncertain, make us question everything. And I think this is the end. So bio-nano imperialism. This is my last slide. Awesome. It is, so just in closing, again, John Trudell, know who we are. We are the power, we are shapes of the earth. There's out on the horizon is the human plus, right? Where they are trying to break this code of life. And I think, as Cliff has said, the us that is us is sacred and it is untouchable, even though in our own minds, we can be really concerned and in our physical minds and bodies, but that there is this untouchable place. But they're trying to break in there. I don't think they're going to be able to do it. And a lot of that has to do with the blood-brain barrier, getting in there with the neural lace networks and the nanoelectronics, these self-assembling nanowires that I talked about with graphene, that Libre is a part of, and that the Rice University is a part of. Harvard and Mitre clearly has been a part of since the at least the mid 1990s, and that it's this cellular colonial AI, and it's trucking along. It's trucking along with the support of the military and with big pharma and big tech. But ultimately, I think that we have to be the ones to protect the earth, to protect nature, to know that is where our true power is, with God, with the creation, that life is on the side of life. And even though all of this seems very overwhelming, that we're here, there's still many beautiful things about being in the world and connections. And I see Lynn is here too. And I love all you guys. And so that's what I've got on Mitre, but I just really wanted to sort of surface this particular institution that speaks to the corruption of our government structure, our nonprofit structure, our academic structure, and that they have been creating and fabricating and attempting to build an illusion of the world and consciousness that is a false reality, but that we don't have to agree to it. We can say we don't consent. So I guess that's it. I'll stop there.
All right. So I've got a couple questions, but we did have someone else join us. We've got a special guest. We've got she was joking. She posted on my Facebook, I'll join you guys, and she put a picture of the Threes Company. So so Lynn,
come on, knock on our door. I'm in sunny Colorado, near you, Jason.
King Central.
Yeah. The doors are prettier here in Colorado.
Yeah, Colorado's the place to be.
Yeah.
Preferably
nice.
up in the mountains where you are. Yeah. Lynn's up in the mountains. I'm down in the big city.
Oh.
Yeah. But I'm going to see you tomorrow.
That's right. Yeah, we're going to hang out tomorrow. I know you and Alison have had discussions about Mitre. Do you want to kind of, first of all, just real quick, introduce yourself for people? I've done an interview with you, but not everyone that's watching may know who you are real quick.
Well, my start in this is kind of similar to Alison's, where it began in public education, being a public school parent, and started seeing the technology and the data collection, testing, and all of that stuff, and then realizing that this was a far bigger agenda that Alison helped me make the leap with, and really understand what was coming. But that's pretty much
it's crazy how it zooms out. I mean, like when you start with like one thing, right? And you get a handle on that one thing, and then the next, then you get the next thing and the next thing. And it just like, who knew it would be Logan's Run, right? Like who knew that
right.
that's where we would end up with, right? And
although I've made it past 30, so maybe that's good.
So do you want to
you die at 30?
Lynn, you have a connection to Logan's Run, sort of, kind of, right?
Well, so my mom was supposed to be an extra in the movie, and then when she went to for the casting call or whatever, they said, well, you have to be completely naked under your costume. And she was like, okay, no thanks. And she was probably like 20, I don't know, it would have been 70, probably 75 or so. The movie came out in 76. So I was born in 71. I would have been really little. Yeah. But it was filmed in Dallas, and the building where it was filmed is now it's a 23 acre biotech hub where all these social impact organizations are moving in there. It's kind of a strange coincidence.
The Draper, the Draper Kaplan Richards Foundation is one of the ones, because they've got this pairing of biotech and social impact incubators, right? And so this idea of sensor data feeding in your digital twin, controlling your behavior, like that's really quite real. And a lot of your work in the education space had to do with the technology, the ed tech space, and the kids like being emotionally attached to the robot chatbots, the reasoning mind, and just as a mom knowing that wasn't right, that there was something not right about it, and then being willing to keep looking.
Yeah, I went on a call with Alison. That's really where I connected with her first. It was 2016. It was an interview that Alice Linehan did with us, and we were talking about artificial intelligence and the chat bots, and it was this software called Reasoning Mind, which ended up being the first or one of the software programs used for social impact bonds that later came in the legislature. So, it's like I knew something, I follow my instincts. I knew something was wrong, but it wasn't until later. And I look back at that Senate testimony where I was speaking out against it. And now I realize, okay, there was something far bigger going on. And so I was right. I just didn't know exactly what they were up to.
And then we were like, okay, so they're going to train the kids. They're going to make the impact deals. They're going to have to do STEM to build this new world. But we didn't realize at the same time they were doing, like, the plan was this data harvest towards a singularity in some way. I mean, and then
the data, if you look at who's moving into that biotech hub, it's the Commit Partnership, which that's a huge collective impact, social impact organization, nonprofit in Dallas. And then you've got Uplift Charters, the charter schools. They're going to be big players in this. And then so Draper, Richards Kaplan, and it's funded by big oil philanthropist, Lyda Hill Philanthropies.
And what I thought was really interesting when I was looking at it, because it was the former, part of the filming of Logan's Run happened there. And then it was formerly the Exxon campus. But I think before that, even the tall building that was the sort of the feature building was the headquarters of Zales, which is kind of like the diamond, like the jewelry, the mall jewelry store.
Yeah.
And when I was looking into the history of the nanotechnology, there was actually a division on nanofabrication that had many different players involved. And part of what they were trying to do was figure out, okay, so we can imagine building things out of molecules, but we have this fat fingers problem, like we don't know how to do it. And they were trying to figure out, but about building stuff, what was called diamondoid. And like, I kept thinking about man-made diamonds, manufactured diamonds, and like the big oil and the carbon, like that there was something even with Zales at the time in terms of carbon engineering and nano that ultimately is going to lead to this nanofabrication, but was never clear. And even the diamond age is a reference to that, this diamondoid process. the molecular diamond. So I think that it's significant that even before Exxon, that it was Zales. I need to look into more, and South Africa, right? Like the diamond process and man-made diamonds. So
yeah, the history of De Beers is pretty interesting, and Cecil Rhodes. I don't know if
right.
you've done a lot of research on him, but you know, a lot of the stuff that's going on now, like, was instigated by certain individuals, and has carried forward.
Yeah. We're at the end of a long continuum. I don't know. Does anybody have any?
I'm just wondering if Tom Shane is involved. I don't know if you guys have Tom Shane out there, but he's a good friend of mine in the diamond business. No, it's a joke. You guys obviously don't have Tom Shane where you have it.
No.
These commercials that they play over and over and over again. I'm Tom Shane. Now you have a friend in the diamond business. It's like embedded in everybody's.
Right?
That's right. It's embedded in everybody's skull. Where someone asked, why are more peeps? Why are not more peeps listening to Alison? I mean, peeps are marshmallow treats, and I don't think they can actually hear. No, I'm kidding. But no, why are more people not listening to you, Alison?
They are. It's not a numbers game.
No, it really is. I mean, I'm a, what do we say? It's like I'm a seminar level, maybe. I would love to be able to reduce it to like something simpler, but who wants to listen to 3 hours of one person? Like, not a ton of people. So
the way I explained it to Alison, it's I can understand everything she's saying, but it's like a toddler. Before they can actually say it themselves, they understand it, but then they can say it a few months down the road. And so I just have to keep hearing it and hearing it. I'm like her little toddler, following along with what she's saying. I get it, but for me to
a lot of this too, I'm channeling from, like, I mean, I'm synthesizing information from a lot of people, and some people who aren't comfortable being in front of the camera, some people who, you know, we collaborate in other social media spaces, and I bring those conversations in here. So I want to just say, like, the stuff that I'm talking about, I'm like so sweaty now, but it's not just me. Like, I'm here as sort of the ambassador of a body of information that we're building together. And that's what I really want to do with the, like, if I can revisit the website, since we are like so slack about actually doing it, is like, not you, but me, like, not getting around to it, is at this point, like, it should be a collective, like, some of it should be a collective space with people who are, we know in good faith are working through this, I think. So, and yeah, it's, I mean, there's a lot of stories being told, right? And people have to make their way through what story makes sense to them. And
yeah, it really can't be simplified. I saw where someone was saying, could we just have like the version for dummies? And that's not really, because they were saying, you know, you talk so fast and it's hard to understand, but really you just have to stay with it and hear it over and over again. And then it does start to sink in. And then you start to see it in your own community or your own, you know, area where, okay, wait a minute, she was talking about that. And then you can research it yourself. But it really, I don't think the truth can be told, it has to be learned. And so it's just a process.
Yeah.
I mean, I have infographics. So like if you can get like familiar with that, and then you see the news and you're like, oh, this is part of that. Like, or, you know, like, then it starts to make sense to you in your own space. But like, I know it because I've lived it. I mean, Philadelphia is such a crucible, like Dallas. Like I both have the macro, I can look at these reports and say, I know somebody this happened to. This happened at the school board. This happened at the SEPTA, the transit meeting. Like, you know, all these things because you're in the mix in these smart city meetings as well. And so it's more meaningful when you look at a policy about data-driven analytics or stimulations to be like, yeah, that reminds me, like 2 months ago, I'm revisiting being in this room and that's what it was. Like, that's the backstory. But
well, Alison and I both have this unique perspective and a vantage point being, we were stay-at-home moms, or, you know, I know you have the job with the botanical gardens, but you were able to show up to these things. And there are very few people who can take the time to show up at all these meetings, whether it's commissioners court, city council, or these you know, private equity groups, or these panel things that they have. I would just show up at all those things, and most people are there in favor of it, being cheerleaders about it, and we're there with a skeptical eye, and they're just not used to people questioning them.
Right.
And then you see what the media writes and what the the predators are putting out, and it's totally different than what's actually happening. And so people can start to question, whether it's the smart city stuff or the technology in the schools or the 5G towers, all of that.
I mean, I think honestly, if you could get the Internet of Bio-Nano things, like a report with one visual, like, and they don't even have to know all the technology of the thing to say, like, a title about using biosensors in your body and your brain, like, and show someone and say, this is all connected to this. And by the way, this is being run to benefit the military and the hedge funds, right? Like the data there that's in this, and that's part of the like, who do you trust? Is my frame went from being a much more trusting person to seeing bad things happen in my community that I knew were not motivated by true goodwill. And then seeing things happen on a larger stage, seeing things happening at Standing Rock, to see the militarized assault on a grandmother and go, oh, that shook it loose. Like, okay, I can no longer presume that just because something says that they're here for my benefit, that it is true. Because even though for much of my life it was true, that's structurally not how the system is built. And now in this new version, we're all disposable, right? Like, we don't want to consider ourselves as being thought of as by disposable about the people who are running our world, but that seems to be the truth. And if you're not going to just do it for yourself, do it for the children, right? Like, do it for the kids. And I just think, honestly, if you could get somebody to believe one of these papers and say, this is where this goes, are we going here? Like, then that could crack it open. That's why I said on my Twitter today, I'm like, if you're going to one of these protests, on the back, could you please put nanotechnology so that, like,
I sent a screenshot of that. I know people who are going to one in Fort Worth, I think, or somewhere, Fort Worth, Texas. And I'm like, can you just add this to it?
I know, because like, people don't know. They don't know what they don't know. And then when you try to say it, they say, well, you must let me put a clown face on you and make fun of you because surely that can't be the truth. And I'm like, no.
Oh, I did just put a clown face on our county judge. So
oh, Lynn.
That was bad. That was really juvenile. He's trying to lock us down and mask us. He is a clown. You're not.
I was trying to think on the simplification issue. I was trying to think of like doing little segments and having little names for them, so I could do like Sippy Cup Corner or something like that for like the. I also thought of like the good news,
like Jello shots.
the good news gazebo. We're like, hey kids, we're gonna go to the good news gazebo, and we could like tell something positive or something. But yeah, there's kind of something you gotta. It's so insane when you start to look at this stuff. You kind of like have to figure out ways to like keep your sanity. But it's hard though, because like, I mean, I know I've fallen into that where I just take a cheap shot just because it's funny and I'm like just cracking a joke, even though I know it does nothing at all to actually help the situation other than to just like relieve some pressure off of me, So I get it.
I fell for it. I went.
Oh, I've been there.
I was learning that new feed that, well, of course, it's not new, but I never do the Facebook story thing. I was like playing around with it. I was like, oh, I can drag a clown face right on.
That'll get you in trouble.
Oh.
No, I don't want to go into lockdown again. I don't want to be imprisoned. I don't want to be geofenced. I don't want my kids to have to wear masks to school.
We should get a t-shirt that says, don't geofence me, bro.
Don't geofence.
I have my dandelion one. I have my
you do have that one.
Yeah, like don't geofence me in. Yeah.
Don't geofence me in. Yeah, that's right. I saw that.
You should get that. You should get one to wear, like, if they do that again.
I sent Alison this some awful decor in the restaurant where we went last night, and it was these giant dandelions.
Mega.
The Nephilim dandelions in Colorado. Huge. No, they weren't real, but that was just funny.
I do have a few comments and questions here. For the impending Internet 2.0, it's actually Web 3. That's the new web. It's called Web 3, which will require licenses, credentials to even access it. Does that mean that VPNs, virtual private networks, will go away? I mean, some ways they kind of already are going away, because like I know when I use a VPN, they like throttle it, and there's some sites that I can't even, they're like, sorry, you got a VPN, you can't come here. But that's probably a better question for Joseph, who's who's probably watching. He might be able to answer that on the thread, but if you guys want to chime in.
I mean, I will say, so one of the rabbit holes that we went down like early on, which was our friend Emily like found, was this Global Education Futures Forum, which was Pavel Leksha. You can look it up. He's out of the University of, or out of Skolkovo in Russia, but they did this foresight map, and it's global. And at the time, the guy, I think this was maybe 2012, the document, was Tom Vander Ark, who was a Gates Foundation guy and later turned ed tech venture capitalist. But they created a map of education through to 2035, and it was a foresight document. So it was sort of projecting based on current understandings of what everything would be. And really like in like sort of 5-year increments, you can kind of track it. It tracks pretty closely. People would be like, how do you know all these things? I'm like, well, I just read this document they say and then pay attention to the news. But one of them specifically said a universal ID for the internet. So they had already anticipated that there was going to be some trackable, because that will be your digital twin. And if you remember back, like a couple months ago, that was at the IMF was saying that we should link people's searches to their identity. And so that's all part of the digital twinning apparatus. And the
easiest way to do that is through the schools, because I know Crown Castle is the huge tower that's in my neighborhood, and Crown Castle was the one who provided the Wi-Fi hotspots to Dallas ISD and my kids' school district, Richardson ISD, and that's where Gates invested $650 million, which you had pointed out the year before the pandemic. So it would be easy for them to do that unique ID for families who are on those, and that could tie in with that blockchain deal with Greenlight Credentials, who's also working with Dallas ISD. You'll see, I think, these partnerships like that. And then you'll have the mental health piece with Greenlight Vital 6. And so everything will be, this one-stop.
And I think that's what's so insidious, is understanding that what's coming with the technology, even basic screen-based technology, not to mention biosensors with mental health, knowing that social emotional learning is a huge piece of the social impact finance. But really, I think what they most want out of children is their emotional states. Like, I mean, they can probably get a whole lot of Fitbit step counts pretty easy, but like to actually access children in sort of raw and vulnerable situations, like that's what this thing that they're trying to construct really wants. It's really gross to think about, but they want people in their vulnerable state so that they can get that kind of data to fill out their profile. And so with
the school, you'll see what you've done research on NWEA maps, just to kind of bring it down to a more recognizable access point. So a lot of these schools have started using NWEA maps for assessments, and it has the behavior, it can do the behavioral assessments and the social emotional piece tied in with the academic piece. And eventually that could be used, like what you were just saying.
Well, Otis was presenting in Jim Heckman's at the University of Chicago in his presentation. And I think Otis is working on the NWEA map testing, like was one of their preferred providers, and they got like an award for social emotional data tracking. And he literally in the presentation that's on their social emotional learning conference said, are we, as a former administrator of a suburban Chicago school district, am I going to tell parents that we're tracking their kids' neuroticism? No. And then it's like, I'm going to find something else that's not going to pack the school board meeting. But he didn't say he wasn't going to do it. He's just not going to tell people.
Right. I think that's one of our biggest challenges right now, is the fact that people have a difficult time and a strong resistance to actually acknowledging or even considering the idea that what we're being told is not the actual goal or motivation. Whether it's a politician or a business person or whatever, these people like Giordano or Cardano or whatever, like that there actually is ulterior motives. There's something that prevents people from thinking that there's an ulterior motive. Like everything's out in the open, and this is what they say is what they mean, and they're well intentioned and
Hearts and minds, Jason. They're winning hearts and minds.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
People
We're going
want
to come into your community school. We're going to win your hearts and minds. We're going to give you food, and we're going to give you dental checkups and vision care. But then it's not really about that. It's about getting your retinal scans and your, biosensor stuff, and like getting your kid injected with things without parental consent. It's not okay.
Yeah, if you're against community schools where I live, I mean, you must be you must hate children, and you must be a racist, and you must be anti. I don't know. You can't sound the alarms on those things because it's so widely accepted. And this has been in the works since 1989. I was just watching a video from Shirley McCune, and she was speaking to the governors, the National Governors Association, and she was talking about community schools. So this is not a new concept. It's been going on for a very long time. And the pandemic has made it the perfect hub because they're not really learning there. It's not about learning because we don't need to be focusing on learning because we have to meet all these other needs. And so here, we'll give you your food, your vaccines, your mental health, services and everything. I mean, yeah, okay, we'll stick you on a device if you need to learn to read or whatever. But for the most part, the schools are not going to be for education. They're going to be these hubs.
Centers. Yeah. I mean, and part of that, even like I was a while ago going back and watching the presentation with Tom Luce, when he was saying that because a lot of this is coming out of the Chamber of Commerce too. So I think there are certain people who imagine that, the community school model, that's like the communists or the socialists that are trying to get in. But it is what it is. Like, it's the Chamber of Commerce because like they're saying we want control of the children. Like, we want to raise them up in the way that we want to raise them up, which will also be, impact investing. But he's like, I can imagine, Dave, where there's a corporate campus and like we just have all of our kids like from cradle to career, like under our control. Well, what's
he
like
said that in the Houston Chronicle article Tom Luce did. And Tom Luce goes way back to the Department of Education. I think he was under Bush, and
the operator.
Yeah, and
then I think that was an interview with the Federal Reserve at the Dallas Fed.
Oh, you're right, that was. But he did. There was a quote they had a bunch of pictures of him in the Houston Chronicle. It's weird, and he mentioned something similar to that.
They want the kids. They want, and then that's the piece. Some of the I don't have slides on this, but I was looking into articles before. If you understand that for this human plus metaverse, this flattened two-dimensional digital twin world, they want to bring the children up. They're setting up the prenatal social impact funds now tied to Medicaid, and some of that, like the graphene, is stuff that they've already been studying how to create biocompatibility, like around the placenta, like around, and there's quite a bit of use around like women's menstruation pads and different and graphene condoms, and like there's a lot of graphene being put around people's reproductive organs and all of that. And so you just have to, like, when people are like, well, maybe I don't believe, the microscopy report. Give me a break, guys. This is the thing that we have to be looking at. Like, this material is coming into everything, and it's in this Build Back Better is being woven into this sustainable future of two-dimensionality and data analytics and electromagnetic frequency manipulation. And somebody has to stand up for life. Like, literally, that's what I'm saying. And it's not just human life, it's all of life. Somebody has to stand up.
All right, and I'm in the Bible Belt here, and you have all these on the right that are talking about being pro-life, but they don't want to talk about this stuff. Yeah. It's just the political talking points surrounding abortion. But to me, if you're pro-life in all stages.
Yeah.
Right? And this
well, even with that, I always wondered, people that are pro-life but support war. I never really understood that concept there. So I think this is a similar thing. It's like, it's not really that they're pro-life. It's like, there's something else going on there. That's just
use abortion, Israel, and couple other things as tools, because if they stand firm on those things, it doesn't matter what else they do, they get an automatic vote.
I don't know.
Did divide people? That keeps people divided. If we come out and we say, listen, what is coming is a takeover, a militarized takeover of all your autonomy, sovereignty, to turn life into something that is transhuman, that we can't even imagine what that is, that won't be under our control anymore. That would actually unite people around the world, like in across all interest groups, to stop that from happening. But that's the narrative that, like, again, if you're looking at all of the other media spaces, like all the other outlets, all the other stories that are being told, all of the other framings, like, I would be curious if there's any other core groups out there that are asserting that as the conversation. Like, there's a lot of other people feeding stories and information, but like, in terms of the overall narrative, to me, how do we bring people together in this? Because I think it's Joseph says, it's the game for all the marbles, at least in the illusion of reality that we currently inhabit at this level, you know, this game of materialism that we're in, that's what it's about. So
I have a question for you, Alison. So regarding 6G, and if 6G is digital twinning, so at what point, so, you know, we heard about 5G and then we would see it on billboards. 5G is here, and it became, you know, common knowledge for most people, and you could see it on your phone. When is 6G like timeline, do you think? In a year, or do you think it's?
No, I don't have a good sense of that. I mean, I wish I could say. I mean, I think what Joseph has said is that the 6G, the next level, is the twinning and the robot-to-robot communication. So I would say like a 3 to 5 year, maybe. Like, I don't know exactly. Like, I don't know how long it's going to take before they actually, because I think what's happening is with the graphene is to figure out the biocompatibility, both in terms of your internal uptake and like what the dosing, because all of the studies they've been doing around cytotoxicity in that and various things, like there's a whole lot about this particle size and the dosing and things that may be also with the frequency. So if you understand that what we're in is possibly like a giant experiment around transhumanism, right? Like this, and I do not think at this point that it is mass immediate genocide, that is really like, how are we tweaking our existing stock of materials, you know, like our herd, our livestock thing, how do we get this thing in a way that doesn't kill everybody off? And so that could take 3 to 5 years, because if it's not just the material, but it's also the small cell modulation, because my understanding is as more and more items become resonating with the 5G, the engagement goes up. So like you could have a 5G, but if there's nothing pinging off of it, the emissions off of it are substantially less than if it's like everybody's got an Internet of Things toaster, and Internet of Things refrigerator, like wearable shirts, all like once that stuff goes, that it's going to be much more intense. And so I'm thinking, I'm kind of just throwing it out there, but I would think that they would need some time to refine it before they move on to the next phase.
Okay, and so the resistance to that would be to opt out of, I mean, what's the fastest way for people, or what would resonate with people the most to not participate in this?
I mean, to me, it feels like what we're fighting is transhumanism. Mm-hmm. I mean, at a baseline is that we're fighting a military takeover of our bodies, like through these. I'm sorry, there's like, it's loud out there. I'm gonna have to ring off in a bit because I'm supposed to go to dinner with Neil. But
the transhumanism. So
yeah, I think that the discussion around transhumanism is key, because if we don't know that what the actual end game is, it's transhumanism towards the singularity and this code breaking thing. But to me, like, that's something that people of faith should be all about, right? Like this idea that a militarized force would take over the place of God. Like, to me, that, like, if we could get there, right? In a peaceful, like what I'm saying is they want this thing to feed off of aggression. That's what all of the structures are calculating, that they will create people who can be framed as treasonous, treacherous, seditious, like, the thing is to not be that thing. Like, that's not how you engage in this larger spiritual dimension, I think. If you play the game that they want you to play it, then you're stuck according to their rules, and we don't have those tools to overcome them.
I've got 3 things from YouTube. So the first thing was actually someone who made a comment, actually directed to me, but it could be to you and all of us. Said you should publish a list of research topics that we could help with. And the first one that comes to mind on that, and we can do this on Alison's website, but the first thing that comes to mind for me, the area that's really lacking is the monetary and financial piece of it, which I think is huge. I come from a background of studying the monetary system, but this whole, learning about smart contracts and central bank digital currency basically changes the game. So I know a lot of people that are still in the monetary space are like, why aren't you guys talking about the monetary system more? And does need to be incorporated more. But the challenge that at least I have is that these new things literally changes what we think of as money. Smart contracts and programmable digital money changes the whole game. So I'm trying to like figure that out. And so again, I'm going to do another show with John Titus, but I think that's an area that really needs to be researched about what's happening, not historically, because like I've studied the Federal Reserve Bank and even going back to history of money, but there's obviously new things that are happening right now that we need someone like Alison to be uncovering, like digging deep into that on that front. That's my first thought there. But so and I'll just read the last 2 and then we can go, you guys can comment on it. Someone mentioned there are a lot of blockchain meetup groups that we could need to infiltrate and disrupt. And
you can do that on Eventbrite. You can find them.
Yeah. And then someone said 5G is being stopped in California. It's just not being seen. So I hope that's the case. That sounds promising. But yeah, we obviously, the control of information, we don't really, it's hard to find out what actually is happening. But anyways, those were the initial things. You guys want to respond to that?
Well, I would say, like, for me, the understanding the spatial web, which is kind of builds off of the programmable money, is really important. And I think if people understood the world as like GIS layers of information with permissioned access, and that like, I think honestly, the future of money in tokenization it's going to be much more like script than any kind of fiat currency, that, this token, linking these tokens and just total speculative made up stuff is part of what's coming, but it's built on the built environment and the geofencing and the behaviors. So I think if people had a better sense of that and how the gaming was being built in, literally how the augmented reality, mixed reality world was being baked into the spatial web, that would be helpful. So if there were people out there who could, look into that and re-articulate that for people, I think it might shake loose some of the confusion over blockchain is just about crypto or a safe media platform, and that it's actually something much bigger.
Yeah, know that blockchain, like in Dallas, the blockchain credentials people, it's a for-profit deal. So they pitch it as it's this open source digital ledger, but they got an insider deal to get access to all those kids who will be put on blockchain. And it's pitched as, this is great for kids. They'll be able to access their transcripts, and they'll be able to bypass the registrar, and they'll be able to store, all these things on their life. What do they call it? The life. Well, it's life on the ledger, but you can call it life something. I forget.
So Jason, so it was the California 5G. I mean, I think that would be great. Clearly California is deep. It's deep in the pilots of all of the impact investing and the National Interoperability Collaborative. So I would say there is some technology that's in Salt Lake City test bed, like a 5G gigabit test bed that doesn't say 5G, it's some other system so I would just be careful that it's not a bait and switch. I mean, not that the advocates would know that, but like they might be like, fine, we'll let it go because we know it's actually going to be this other technology. And all of that stuff that I put in Little Sis got erased out. The new system in Salt Lake City, it's a test bed that's like part downtown, part residential, and part hospital, like university hospital complex, and they just took it all out. And there was actually, I think, a tie to one of the universities in Texas, Lynn. So just be cautious, because Gavin Newsom is part of this. He's a central player in the impact investing space. Data Zone, all of that is baked into Silicon Valley, the digital twinning. Like, I guess that's where I'm saying, like, we have to be cautious that it's not just one piece, like, oh, we won on this one niggly piece over here, because then they've already got their back door into this other thing. Like, it's the clarity of the overall trajectory. And I can't remember, was there one other question?
No, they were really comments more than anything. But I did have a friend that asked me about, doing a show on using AI in the medical field. I don't know if you've explored that at all. But
well, I mean, I would be interested if they are familiar with all of the other elements of like the biotech space, because like I've even heard, like, I think people talking about using blockchain credentialing for like radiology, or people like who have a subspecialty, and then they can do it remotely. And again, they always pick a use case that seems perfectly reasonable, and then you can say, well, how could you be against that? But it's like, what happens like when soon your doctor is a chat bot and it's all based on your biosensor data that's long because you're near some bad tower, or your reception cuts out or something. Like, there's just a lot of problems. So I'm wondering if people who are in the medical space even know about any of this stuff I'm talking about. Like, because I feel like the research section, like the people who are doing, literally, they're engineers. These are not healthcare providers. These are mechanical engineers, electrical engineers. If the surgeons, if the providers even know what's being planned, because these are giant global markets. This is capitalism. Like, this is that other piece is, when I go to states and say, well, you got like 2,000 biotech businesses, like, how do you think they're going to make money? They're not going to make money unless people are sick, or you can make people use your stuff. So of course you're going to like end up with, digital simulations of illness that make people use your solutions.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a surprise when you build your economy that way. We need a better economic system.
what do you think of the Patriot phone? That was another question.
Oh.
Well, is that the Freedom phone that Candace Owens was pimping?
Well,
there's more than one, actually. There's more than one people that are promoting Freedom phones.
I would say it would be good to make sure that it was not tied to Raytheon. Ultimately, it's not about the phones. If people are still fixated on the phones, like, yeah, the phones are bad. The phones are a directed energy weapon, essentially. If you think it stops with the phone, you have missed the whole conversation of what we're talking about. Because
well, I think people want to have something that they can do, that's tangible,
It's all a weapon. And so you use the weapon like knowing it's a weapon. I mean, it just is. There's no way a smartphone isn't a weapon. Like, I'd like to comfort people, but there's no, like, I don't know. Like, there's no one answer. If you want to research something and find something that's better than Google or but it's all the same stuff. It's all part of the simulation. I don't know. Wish there was an easy answer, but I think too, the Patriot narrative is not helpful. I'm just saying it again. Like, again, if you're framing something, this may be difficult, as a Patriot thing, you've missed the problem is that our entire infrastructure from the beginning was built on an erasure and possession of resources, which are now all of us. So, and this Mitre stuff has been built like all the way through our military. Like, it didn't just go wrong at some point. Like, there was an entitlement system that was built into feeling like that they could own us as data analytics and simulated gaming programs to throw us into AI to get the singularity. They didn't care about us. Like, this idea that we're somehow going to restore a military glory, red, white, and blue thing. Like, I don't think that's, like, then in the story that I am telling myself, like, that's not how this gets fixed. This thing gets fixed with figuring out, like, we should stop dominating people. We should not stop dominating other people, and then we should stop dominating each other. We should have our government stop dominating us.
You put it in that word when you typed that today. I think it was freedom, DOM, dom, dominate, and those are also words used on the right a lot. Freedom, liberty, and even life. And it's they're twisted and
Get some
What would be interesting is you talked about doing a glossary, Allison, but it would be interesting doing a glossary that shows the multiple meanings of words within different groups. You know, so the right has a certain definition of something. People on the so-called left, you know what I mean? Like I use these terms, even those terms have different meanings for different people. So it's almost like you need to have like a tree trying to, you know, branching out, like seeing like, okay, here's the word and here's all the different, you know, interpretations that people or understandings that people have of what that word means.
Well, because Alison and I have been able to well, you too, Jason, we've been able to step back from the parties and see them much more clearly. And you can see how they use the language. That's a great idea. In all your spare time, Alison, can you
I gotta get the first glossary together.
Yeah.
I don't know how you do all that you do. And garden.
I haven't been doing as much gardening lately, but I missed it.
Well, I think we're caught up on the questions. I'm glad that you joined us, Lynn. That was
Yeah, thank you. I'm gonna go fight the 5G and 6G and go climb a mountain.
Great.
It'll
Thanks everybody
find you.
for hanging out, and hopefully you know more about Mitre Corporation and the Cold War and cybernetics and Medicaid and precision medicine and creepy James Giordano's ideas about digital twinning and targeting people through biohacking. And but don't despair, because look, there's many beautiful people in the world and we're doing good stuff. So.
And those who are despairing, I know there are a lot of people in despair. Do something, you know, like put your energy, you know, for one, it lets you focus your energy on something. And yeah, I mean, even if it's not, even if it's just to maintain your sanity, you know, just going out for a hike or something. But, you know, I think the worst thing you can do is just to sit there and feel overwhelmed and, you know, not be active, you know.
Well, bye everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Jason.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Yeah.
Bye. Okay, I'll stop the live stream and then we can